Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the silk-draped candlelit world of royal bedrooms. Not the romantic kind, but the kind where sex is a razor-edged weapon used for power, politics and empire building. And tonight, you're Cleopatra. You're 21 years old, banished from your own throne, your siblings are trying to kill you, and your one chance at taking Egypt back is currently stomping around Alexandria with a Roman army. His name is Julius Caesar, and you're about to roll yourself into a rug and get delivered to his suite like a spicy ancient DoorDash order. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Well, not you, but the you playing Cleopatra in this story. That's the kind of bedtime tale we're telling tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not sending any spies to charm you into it. Probably. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I always love seeing the global bedtime crew show up. Drop your city and time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're barefoot, not by choice, but because royal sandals squeak on marble and you cannot risk any sound. Your heart is hammering, your lungs are tight. The linen rug you're about to hide inside smells faintly of wine and jasmine smoke. Servants glance at you from the corners of the palace halls, knowing better than to speak your name. This is treason. You're Cleopatra VII Theophilopata, and you're about to seduce the most powerful man in the known world. Because seduction isn't a game here. It's the only tool you have left. Your younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, currently controls the throne. And he's a child, yes, but a child with a very adult regent, a bloodthirsty advisor named Pothinus, who's doing his best to erase you from the chessboard entirely. You've already fled to Syria once. That didn't work. Now Caesar is here in Alexandria, fresh from crushing Pompey, looking to bring Egypt into Rome's arms. If you can get to him, really get to him, you might turn his gaze away from Ptolemy and toward you. But he's heavily guarded. You can't just stroll in. So here's the plan. You strip down to nothing but a fine linen shift. Your ally, Apollodorus, helps you stretch out on the rug. You lie back still, like some Greco-Egyptian gift to the gods, and you feel the fabric close around you, tight and scratchy and smelling of sweat. The air goes dim. Your arms ache from holding still. Then, he lifts you, a human burrito of rebellion and hope. Through the corridors you go, past guards, past firelit courtyards, into the quarters where Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, executioner of Pompey, is reviewing maps by oil lamp. Apollodorus speaks quickly in Greek, flattering him. A gift for the Roman general, he says. Caesar gestures. The rug unrolls. You tumble out, wild-haired and flushed from the heat. You sit up slowly, meeting his eyes. No fear, only power. He's stunned, but curious. You speak in his language, your Latin tinged with Alexandria's honey. You don't beg, you propose. An alliance, a kingdom restored, Egypt stable, under Rome's protection, under your reign. Now here's the historical fact. This moment actually happens. Multiple ancient sources mention Cleopatra's dramatic rug delivery, though the details differ. Was it a sack, a tapestry, a rolled carpet? Who knows? But the intent is clear. She leveraged allure, surprise and bold theatre to seize Caesar's attention in a world where women were seen as pawns. And here's your quirky fact. Cleopatra wasn't just sexy. She was intimidatingly brilliant. She spoke 9 languages. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in centuries to even bother learning Egyptian. Her voice, according to legend, was her true weapon. Low, persuasive, and musical. She used perfumed sails, exotic animals, and pure charisma to create living propaganda. The ancient world was basically her Instagram reel. Now for the scholarly hot take. Was it actually sex that won Caesar over? Or was it strategy disguised as seduction? Some historians argue that their first night together was more of a war council than a romance. Cleopatra needed troops. Caesar needed local support and legitimacy in Egypt. The physical aspect may have been secondary. But that's part of the point, right? The line between affection and alliance is paper thin in royal history. And Cleopatra knew exactly how to blur it. Anyway, your gamble works. Within days, Caesar has ousted Ptolemy and declared you queen, but with conditions. Your little brother must co-rule with you, and Rome's hand is now very much on the steering wheel. You agree? What choice do you have? You invite Caesar to stay, and he does, for months. You cruise the Nile together in a golden barge, sipping wine, feeding rumours. You have his child, a boy named Caesarion. And for a brief moment, you're not just surviving. You're shaping history with every gaze, every whispered word in bed, every stroke of your oar down the Nile. But deep down, you know this won't last. Rome is volatile. Caesar's enemies are rising. The sex may be part of the plan, but it's not a shield. And when Caesar is assassinated in 44 BCE, stabbed on the floor of the Senate, your whole empire on a mattress collapses with him. Still, you did it. You pulled yourself from exile, rewrote your fate with a single impossible gamble, and reminded the world that sex, in the hands of a queen, is never just sex. It's a sword. It's a scroll. It's an empire. You're in a palace again, but this time the walls are cold stone, not warmed by desert sun. The windows are long and narrow, the drapes stiff with English rain. You're not Cleopatra anymore. You're Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, and your enemies call you the Bastard. But that's fine. You've got a better nickname now, the Virgin Queen, and while everyone's obsessed with whether you'll marry or not, you've figured out something none of them quite realise yet. If you never say yes to anyone, you never give your power away. You are, in short, playing the longest tease in European history. Your sister, Bloody Mary, is finally dead, and now you sit on the throne she tried to keep from you. You've dodged plots, pretenders, and assassination attempts. Your bloodline is shaky. Your legitimacy is always under question. So what do? You make yourself into something untouchable, divine, ethereal, a walking symbol of national identity. You become the bride of England itself. This isn't coyness. This is strategy. You let your court fawn over you. Poets compare you to goddesses. Portraits show you with eyes on her cloak and snakes under her feet. Your skin is powdered white as chalk. Your dress is impossible to breathe in. Your hair fire red and crowned. Every nobleman in Europe wants your hand, and every one of them thinks he's got a chance. You write letters to suitors that are half flirty, half vague political policy. You hint at marriage to gain alliances and withdraw just before the ring appears. You practically ghost kings. France, Spain, Austria. They all think they might win the English throne through your bedroom, but you never let any of them inside. Here's your historical truth for tonight. Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years, and she never married. In an era where a woman on the throne was expected to become someone's wife as soon as possible, she refused. It wasn't out of prudishness or religious devotion. It was about power. As soon as she became someone's wife, her body would become his property. Her crown would risk becoming his crown. And so, she dodged marriage like a boxer dodges a punch. Not because she couldn't love, but because she couldn't afford to lose. And oh, did she know how to love? Strategically anyway. You play favourites. Your long-time obsession is Robert Dudley, childhood friend, master of the horse, scandalously handsome. You let him live just down the hall from your private rooms. You gift him lands. You toy with rumours. Everyone's sure you'll marry him. Except you never do. Even when his wife dies under suspicious circumstances, you don't close the deal. Maybe you believe in loyalty. Maybe you just like the drama. Maybe you know that the minute you choose, the spell breaks. Here's your fringe fact. Elizabeth employed a woman named Blanche Parry as her personal attendant, and she was likely the only one allowed near the Queen in her most private moments. Blanche served her for over 50 years, knew her cycles, her moods, her secrets. And some historians suspect Elizabeth's whole virginity branding was carefully co-managed by women like Blanche, who kept the gossip in check and the truth buried under layers of symbolism and starch. Now here's the scholarly debate that still echoes through dusty libraries and late-night documentaries. Was Elizabeth really a virgin? Or was her image just another crown, something she wore with purpose, not honesty? Some biographers argue yes. Her childhood trauma, watching her mother beheaded, being abused in adolescence, all might have left her cold toward physical intimacy. Others think it's nonsense, that she simply refused to let anyone define her through sex. After all, a queen who never marries can never be a wife, and if she's never a wife, she's never subject to a husband's rule. Virginity becomes less a moral state and more a political position. And you, well, you play that position like a concert violinist. When the Spanish Armada threatens your coast in 1588, you put on a silver breastplate and ride out to meet your troops at Tilbury. You tell them you have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but the heart and stomach of a king. You remind them that you are not married, not swayed, not owned, and therefore utterly English. And it works. The Spanish ships scatter, storms help, but your presence, your image, your weaponized virginity, it all stokes the fire. You never name an heir. You leave behind a court obsessed with legacy and confusion, but that's part of it too. You keep everyone guessing, even as you wither into age. Your face cracks under the white lead paint. Your teeth blacken from sugar. You grow thin and sharp, but still they kneel. Still they write you poems. Still they beg for your glance. Because your power is not just that you refuse to sleep with any of them, it's that you made them believe they almost could, that England herself almost could, and that maybe, just maybe, if they were just a little better, a little more loyal, a little more worthy, you'd say yes. But you never do, so when you finally lie down for good in 1603, after a reign longer than most people's lifespans, you're still cloaked in mystery. The Virgin Queen, the Gloriana, the ultimate royal tease, and you knew exactly what you were doing. You've had enough of subtlety. You're done with silk fans and fluttering eyelashes. You want something louder, something messier. So tonight, you're Henry VIII. Yes, that, Henry. You're 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, terrifyingly charismatic, and currently spiralling into paranoia masters royal confidence. And you're about to turn the act of getting laid into a full-scale constitutional crisis. It starts innocently enough. You're young, athletic, obsessed with tournaments and music, married at 18 to Catherine of Aragon, your dead brother's widow. It's a political match, but she's beautiful, educated, and kind. You love her truly, for a while. But then the years drag on. No male heir, miscarriages, dead infants. You're starting to think God's punishing you. You're starting to think it's Catherine's fault. But instead of therapy, you choose something more exciting. Seduction meets nation-state rupture. And enter Anne Boleyn. She's not the most traditionally beautiful woman at court, but she's electric, sharp-tongued, fashionable, French-educated. She refuses to be your mistress. That's her power move. While other women swoon into your bed like feathered accessories, Anne keeps her distance. She teases, she flirts, she writes you notes folded with perfume and sarcasm. You're obsessed. So what do? You ask for a divorce. Simple, right? Not even close. You beg the Pope to annul your marriage to Catherine. He refuses. Political mess. Catherine is the aunt of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. No way is the Pope crossing him. But you're king. You're divine. You're Henry freaking Tudor. So you do the unthinkable. You break England off from the Catholic Church. Here's your historical fact. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy officially made Henry VIII the head of the Church of England. One man's lust and need for a male heir literally split Western Christianity. Rome shook, monasteries burned, thousands died, and all because Anne Boleyn said no. That was her superpower, denial as a political tool. But the moment you get her, everything starts unravelling. She gives you a daughter, Elizabeth, but no sons. You sour fast. She's demanding, opinionated, and not nearly as compliant as you expected. Rumours fly, she's a witch. She has a 6th finger. She's sleeping with her brother. Honestly, you don't need proof. You just need her out of the way. And so you do what you now do best. Dispose of a wife. You accuse her of adultery and incest. You rig the trial, and you have her beheaded. And within days, you marry Jane Seymour. Here's your quirky fact. You were already courting Jane while Anne was still alive. You even gave her a locket with your portrait in it. Anne ripped it off her neck in front of the court, breaking her fingers in the process. Drama levels. Dangerously royal. Jane gives you what you want, a son, Edward, but dies in childbirth. You mourn her publicly, but move on quickly. Wife number 4 is Anne of Cleves, a German princess whose portrait you love. But when she shows up in person, you're horrified. You call her a Flanders mare. You claim you can't consummate the marriage. Translation, you're not into her and you want out, so you annul it and throw a divorce party. No, really. You give her a castle and a pension. She becomes the king's beloved sister. Honestly, she gets the best deal. Then there's Catherine Howard, young, reckless, sexy. She's barely in her 20s, you're not. She dances, she giggles, she reminds you of what your power used to feel like. But she's also careless. She takes lovers behind your back. When you find out, you're crushed. You cry. Then you execute her. Last comes Catherine Parr, Smart, strategic, widowed twice already. She outlives you. Frankly, she probably deserves a whole section of her own. But here's what you've done, Henry. You've turned marriage into foreign policy. You've turned your wives into soldiers and spies. You've weaponized sex so thoroughly that your bedroom decisions reshape religious identity across Europe. You don't just sleep with women, you decapitate them. Not all of them. Just enough to send a message. Now for the scholarly debate. Was it really about sex and heirs? Or was Henry just addicted to control? Some historians argue that his obsession with succession was an excuse, a way to justify an increasingly erratic need to dominate the people closest to him. Others say his fear of civil war was real. The Wars of the Roses had only ended a generation earlier. A kingdom without a clear male heir. That was an open invitation for chaos. And you, Henry, didn't do chaos. You caused chaos. By the end of your life, you're bloated, infected, paranoid. Your leg ulcers stink. Your courtiers lie about how healthy you look. You cling to your son Edward like a relic of a dream. And when you die in 1547, you leave behind 3 children by 3 different women, and somehow they all end up ruling. Mary burns Protestants. Elizabeth flirts her way through a golden age. Edward dies young but reform-minded. And you? You go down in history as the king with 6 wives, 2 beheadings, and 1 catastrophic crush that tore Europe apart. Sleep tight. Now you're slipping through the opulent corridors of 16th century France, perfume and rot mingling in the air, silk brushing your arms as you pass whispering courtiers. You're not a king or queen tonight, you're Catherine de Medici. And if Cleopatra and Elizabeth played Seduction like a solo instrument, you're the composer of a full symphonic nightmare. Because you don't just use sex as a weapon, you outsource it. You were married at 14 to Henry, second son of King Francis I. He wasn't supposed to be king, and frankly, he wasn't supposed to be interested in you either. He had a lifelong mistress, Diane de Poitiers, 20 years older, elegant, calculating, and far more fascinating to him than his Italian bride. But fate is weird like that. Henry's older brother dies young, and boom, you're queen. Only problem? No one respects you. You're not French, you're not blonde, and you're not popping out heirs fast enough for anyone's comfort. It takes 10 years. 10 before you have a child. Eventually you give Henry 10 kids, but by then Diane has already embedded herself so deeply in the power structure that you're more of a broodmare than a queen. And yet, you're watching, you're learning, you're taking notes. Because once Henry dies, impaled through the eye in a jousting accident no less, the throne passes to your sickly son Francis II. He's 15. Your daughter-in-law is none other than Mary, Queen of Scots, and the court is a nest of ambition. You're done being passive. You start whispering to your people, placing eyes and ears everywhere. You rise from the shadows, a widow in black, and you begin to control the court through its bed sheets. Enter the flying squadron. Sounds like an elite military unit, right? Nope. It's a carefully curated squad of 60 of the most beautiful, clever, sexually persuasive young women in France. Their mission: seduce powerful men, extract secrets, manipulate, distract. Catherine builds a literal spy ring using bodies as bait and pleasure as leverage. These courtesans are trained in etiquette, conversation, and the art of the slow burn. Their weapons? Not daggers, just perfume, skin, and perfectly timed laughter. Historical fact: the flying squadron, Escadron Volant, was real. Accounts vary on whether it was 60 or closer to 100 women, but it operated with Catherine's blessing and at her command. Courtiers knew that sleeping with one of these elite agents might mean your secrets were floating back to the Queen Mother before you even finished tying your hose. The quirky part? Catherine didn't just train these women to be alluring. She allegedly taught them how to use aphrodisiacs, how to stage romantic accidents, and how to navigate conversations like chessboards. There were even rumours she employed astrologers and poisoners in the same circle, because when you're running a court like a war zone, you need a whole menu of options. Now here's the scholarly debate that still gets historians all hot and bothered. Was Catherine the dark puppet master popular culture makes her out to be? Or was she a woman simply doing what she had to in a poisonous, misogynistic royal snake pit? Some scholars argue she was unfairly demonised by later Protestant writers, especially after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where thousands of Huguenots were slaughtered in Paris. Catherine was blamed, naturally. The Black Queen, the foreign poisoner, But others suggest that's the usual fate of powerful women who don't smile sweetly and die quietly. Did she manipulate with sex? Absolutely. But so did everyone else. She just did it better. So there you are, sitting in the Louvre, not the museum yet, just a grimy royal stronghold filled with sweating nobles and the sound of boots on stone. Your son is now King Charles IX. He's fragile, depressed. You manage him like glassware. You arrange his advisors, his lovers, his schedule. You use your flying squadron to disarm rebellious dukes. You marry off your daughters like chess pieces, always 5 steps ahead. When the Protestant factions grow bold, you negotiate, flatter, delay. And when that fails, you smile and plan a massacre during a royal wedding. The blood washes down the cobblestones while you sip from a golden cup, eyes half-lidded, always watching. Because your real power isn't in being queen, it's in surviving every shift of the throne. You outlive 4 of your sons. You see France tear itself apart over religion and greed. You see women painted as harlots and men as martyrs. You see how easily lust can be repackaged as diplomacy, and you use it. You always use it. And here's the thing, you don't need to seduce anyone yourself. You learned long ago that distance gives you plausible deniability. Let someone else lift the hem. You just pull the strings. By the end of your life, you're tired. Your body aches. You've lost more children than most people ever have. You're hated by many, respected by more, and feared by almost everyone. France doesn't love you, but France still stands because of you. The court you leave behind is drenched in rumours, perfumes, and carefully concealed knives. Sex in your hands wasn't for pleasure, it was for policy. And you weaponized it so well, no one ever quite knew whether to thank you or burn you. Tonight it's snowing outside. Not that soft Hallmark stuff. This is Russian snow, hard, wind-whipped, and unsympathetic. Inside the Kremlin, fires are burning, incense curls toward cracked ceilings, and you're Ivan IV. But you probably know yourself better as Ivan the Terrible. You're not sleeping well these days. Too many ghosts, too many enemies, and maybe a little too much mercury in your medicine. But right now your mind is fixated on just one thing, finding a wife. Again, this isn't about love, it's about control and survival, and maybe, if you're honest, the terrifying emptiness creeping up your spine every time you're alone in the dark. Let's rewind. You were crowned Tsar at age 16, the first to ever take that title in Russia. You wanted more than a crown, you wanted divine authority, an emperor of the Orthodox faith. You married Anastasia Romanovna, your first and only true love, and for a moment, just a moment, you were human. She calmed you, softened you. Your court was stable, your governance almost reasonable. And then she died. Poisoned, you're certain, by boyars, those scheming nobles who've always hated your rise. Something in you cracks. The man people once feared out of duty, he becomes something else entirely. Here's your historical fact. Ivan IV had at least 8 wives, though some were never recognised by the church. After Anastasia's death, his marriages became less about dynasty and more about power consolidation, suspicion, and punishment. Some were drowned, others imprisoned. One died just days after the wedding. Officially, illness. Unofficially, you weren't thrilled with her past. Because here's how you start choosing wives now. You gather the most beautiful women from across Russia and neighbouring lands, sometimes hundreds at a time. You don't just want a partner, you want the best breeding stock, the most compliant, the least threatening. You send envoys to every town and village demanding they send their most suitable girls for inspection. They arrive, terrified, 17, 18 years old, lined up, questioned, poked, paraded. It's not a marriage process, it's a royal meat market. This is where the bizarre fact of the night creeps in. Legend has it that Ivan's court had a network of testing chambers where potential brides were examined not just for beauty or health, but for their obedience. Some were sent home for being too outspoken, some simply disappeared. One unfortunate bride reportedly had her teeth pulled when Ivan found her smile too bold. This isn't a man looking for love. This is a man creating a harem of shadows. Now, Russia isn't the Ottoman Empire. You're not building a traditional harem. There's no formal structure, but you're blurring lines. You want loyalty, submission, silence. You want women who reflect your divine image back at you and never question it. And when they do, you deal with it swiftly. And of course, we can't avoid that moment. The one people know even if they know nothing else about you. Your son. The one you groomed to rule. The one bright hope in your line. You get into an argument. Some say it's over your pregnant daughter-in-law wearing immodest clothing. Others say it's politics. Either way you strike him, with a staff, or a scepter, or a clenched fist. It doesn't matter. He falls, he bleeds, and you kill him. One blow, that's all it takes. And suddenly everything, your kingdom, your dynasty, your paranoia, it all turns inward. You've weaponized sex, family, and power to the point that you've erased your own future. Literally. Now here's the scholarly debate. Was Ivan truly mad? Or just the product of a brutal time, pushed past sanity by grief, betrayal, and constant war? Some historians say his erratic behaviour was neurological, mercury poisoning, maybe syphilis. Others argue he was coldly rational, using terror as policy. The Oprichnina, his personal death squad, didn't just murder rebels. They raped, burned, and executed entire towns. That wasn't madness, that was performance. But if you ask the women of your court, the ones who weren't drowned or exiled or beaten, they'd say the line between madness and strategy is just one blood-stained step apart. You spend your final years increasingly alone, twitchy, distrusting everyone. Your court is a shell. Your servants fear your moods. Your guards won't meet your eyes. You cling to religion, commissioning endless icons, hoping maybe the saints will forgive what you've done with your hands. And when you finally die, collapsing mid-game of chess, Russia sighs with relief. The dynasty survives. Barely. Your other son Feodor is too weak to rule. The country spirals into the time of troubles, because of course it does. That's what happens when you turn sex, marriage, and legacy into a slow-moving disaster. So tonight, as the snow keeps falling on Moscow's onion domes, you lie still in your golden robes, face waxy, lips curled, and behind you, in the shadows of your throne room, are the ghosts of all the women who tried to survive you. You're not in Europe anymore. You're far from drafty stone castles and powdered wigs. Tonight, you're slipping through the arched corridors of Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. The lamps flicker low, the marble is warm beneath your bare feet, and heavy drapes muffle your footsteps. You smell rosewater, cardamom, sweat. This isn't just a palace. It's a fortress, a stage, a trap. You're in the harem of the Ottoman Empire, and if you want to survive, you'd better learn the script fast. Forget what you've heard. This isn't some brothel of giggling concubines tossing grapes into their mouths. The imperial harem is a ruthless, meticulously organised hierarchy of women who wield enormous political power, but only if they play the game just right. And you're at the very bottom. You've just arrived, probably enslaved, maybe gifted to the Sultan by a provincial governor trying to win favour. You don't speak Turkish, you don't know the rules, but you're 16, stunning, and you catch someone's eye, which is either a blessing or a death sentence. Here's your historical fact. The harem wasn't just about sex, it was a crucial institution of empire. At its height, it housed hundreds, sometimes thousands, of women, but only a fraction ever saw the Sultan. The rest were trained in language, music, religion, etiquette. Some became teachers, tailors, administrators. Many were eunuchs, or enslaved African women who ran the place like a clock. The harem was a city inside a palace, and every inch of it was political. And at the top, the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother. She holds more influence than almost anyone else in the empire. She controls the flow of information. She approves which concubines might be presented to the Sultan. She even gets involved in major state affairs. You want to survive in here? You get her favour. You avoid making enemies. You learn to read eyes before words. But let's say tonight is different. You've been summoned. You've gone through the ritual, bathed, perfumed, draped in gauze-thin fabrics that leave little to the imagination. Your hair's been oiled and threaded with gold. You walk barefoot through dim halls escorted by silent eunuchs toward the imperial chamber. And inside waits the man who controls everything. Land, sea, armies, coins, lives. The Sultan. You might think that sleeping with him instantly changes your life. It doesn't. Not yet. One night isn't enough. You could be forgotten by morning, or worse, disposed of quietly if you offended someone on the way out. No, if you want power here, you need to do one thing: get pregnant. Because in the Ottoman system, concubines didn't marry the Sultan. He was only supposed to sleep with a woman until she gave birth to a son. Then, sex was off limits. She'd be moved to the mother's quarters, where she could focus on raising the boy. And the more sons a woman had, the more she became entangled in the empire's succession plans, which meant more power, more enemies, more danger. Here's your quirky fact. The sultans often rotated women like a calendar, spending a night with a different concubine each day of the week, based on a rigid schedule. There were no romantic dinners, no lingering glances across crowded rooms. It was efficiency cloaked in silk. You could be summoned one night, sent back the next, and never called again, unless you conceived. Which brings us to the game behind the game, the cafes, or cage. This is where things get dark. When a sultan died, his sons were expected to compete, sometimes literally, for the throne. Early on, this meant fratricide. That's right. Brothers strangling each other with silk cords, sometimes on the very day of their father's funeral. But as things evolved, the empire adopted a new method. Keep all the potential heirs locked in a suite of rooms. No visitors, no wives, no children, just endless days of isolation, waiting, wondering if you'd be summoned to become the next ruler, or quietly executed in your sleep. And who managed these delicate inheritances? Who made sure certain concubines were favoured? Who leaked information to princes in the cafes? The women of the harem. Whispers were weapons, gossip shaped policy. You might think the real action was in the divan, where the men debated matters of state. But half of those decisions were nudged into place by someone reclining on a velvet couch, idly sipping sherbet while a servant massaged her feet. Now for the scholarly debate. Was the harem a prison for women, or a path to unparalleled power? Traditional European sources painted it as pure decadence, cages of silken captives, brainwashed beauties reduced to flesh. But more recent scholarship flips the script. The harem was also a rare environment where enslaved or foreign-born women could ascend to real influence. Some ruled the empire through their sons, or even directly advised on campaigns. Others commissioned architecture, led charitable projects, wrote poetry. So yes, there was coercion, abuse, trauma, but also resistance, strategy, power plays in perfume and lace. You might become a Haseki sultan, the sultan's chief consort, mother of his heir, ruling behind an embroidered veil. You'd be escorted in gold-covered litters, receive ambassadors, fund mosques, or you might disappear, quietly, swallowed by the labyrinth of politics, your name struck from the records. Tonight, as you lie beneath painted ceilings, the sultan's breath warm on your neck, you're not just someone's partner, you're a potential power broker in one of the most feared empires in the world. And tomorrow, if the right line appears on the silk cloth your attendants inspect, if your belly begins to rise, you're in the game. You've weaponized more than your body. You've weaponized possibility. And in Topkapi, that's the most dangerous thing of all. The ship rocks slightly beneath you, but you don't flinch. You've felt worse. You've lived worse. Right now, your wrists are still red from the iron manacles that brought you across the Black Sea. You've barely eaten. Your Turkish is broken. But tonight you walk barefoot into the most powerful palace in the world, and something in your eyes says you're not just another nameless concubine, you're something sharper, and history will soon know you as Roxolana. To the guards and eunuchs leading you through the stone corridors of Topkapi, you're just another girl plucked from a border raid, probably Ruthenian, maybe Polish. The Ottomans don't really care where exactly you're from. You're Christian, you're young, that's enough. They call you Hurrem, the cheerful one, after you flash a crooked smile at a guard who clearly doesn't expect it. You've figured it out already. Beauty gets noticed, but charm gets remembered, and you have both. But here's what makes you different. You adapt. Fast. The harem is a maze of politics, suspicion and routine. Most girls try to keep their heads down. You study. You learn the court language, Ottoman Turkish, better than some of the staff born into it. You pick up Persian poetry, Islamic customs, and just enough timing to know when to be quiet, and exactly when not to be. You're no longer just a girl. You're a strategist with a waistline. Here's your historical fact. Roxolana, also known as Hurrem Sultan, became the legal wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a wildly unprecedented move. No concubine had married a reigning sultan in over 2 centuries. She bore him multiple children and lived in the palace for decades, exercising deep influence over imperial politics and foreign affairs. She changed the course of Ottoman history without ever leading an army. She didn't need to. Your first night with Suleiman is deliberate. You've been prepared, scrubbed, dressed, oiled and adorned until you barely recognise yourself. The room smells like amber and rosewood. You kneel, then rise, and then you look him in the eye. No trembling, no whispering. You speak to him boldly. It's enough to give the eunuchs heart attacks, but he likes it. Oh, he likes it a lot. Suleiman is a strange man, both brutal and philosophical, a poet, a soldier, a reformer, and a killer. And somehow, your chaos slots perfectly into his order. You make him laugh. You challenge him. You refuse to weep or beg when he sends you away. You withhold just enough. He keeps calling you back. Quirky fact, you didn't just survive the harem, you basically rebuilt it. After you gave birth to your first son, tradition said you'd be moved out to the old palace, like all the other concubines who'd done their job. But you stayed, and Suleiman kept inviting you back into his bed week after week, defying generations of protocol. It got people whispering, then fuming. And you turned whispers into policy. You start shaping court alliances. You sponsor building projects, charitable institutions and religious schools. You send letters to foreign monarchs, diplomatic correspondence from a woman. Unthinkable. But you're more than a mistress now. You're the queen without the crown. Eventually Suleiman marries you. Shockwaves go through the empire. You're no longer a slave. You're Sultan's wife. And when he moves the harem to the very heart of the palace, right next to his chambers, you make sure it's designed like a chessboard, with every corridor angled for control. Now scholarly debate? Oh, there's plenty. Some see you as a manipulator who twisted Suleiman's affections to interfere with succession, even convincing him to execute his own firstborn son, Mustafa, to secure your own children's future. Others argue you were a stabilizing force, ensuring continuity in a time of factional madness. Did you whisper poison into the Sultan's ear? Or did you protect your children the only way a woman in the Ottoman court could? By playing the same brutal game as the men, only better. One thing's clear. Your son, Selim II, would become Sultan. Not the strongest, not the smartest, but yours. And when that happened, the real legacy began. The Sultanate of Women. For nearly a century after your rise, the empire was effectively ruled by women, mothers, consorts, sisters, all following the blueprint you carved into the marble. You made it possible. You proved that the royal bed wasn't a cage, it was a throne if you leaned into it the right way. By the end of your life, you're no longer anyone's possession. Your name is carved into mosques. Your letters are stored in foreign archives. You sleep in an ornate tomb beside Suleiman, equal in death as you were, eventually in life. And tonight, as the wind sighs through the carved stone arches of the harem you once ruled, your story lives in every girl who dares to be more than decoration, in every whisper that outmaneuvers a shout. You began as a captive, you died as a queen, and you never once apologized for how you got there. You're standing in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, but the real reflection isn't in the glass. It's in the glint of silk slippers brushing marble, in the flirtatious rise of a fan, in the calculated giggle of a woman whose smile just rearranged the royal council. You're not the king, not technically. You're just the king's mistress. But in this place, just the mistress means you control half the court and 3/4 of the budget. And in this gilded powder keg of perfumes and powdered wigs, your name is whispered with either envy or fear. You're in the reign of Louis XV, and sex is not just a private act, it's public policy. The king is restless, bored, politically disinterested but endlessly passionate. And you're about to learn how this monarch doesn't just use his mistresses for pleasure, he uses them to build an empire of influence behind closed doors. Welcome to the strange, seductive world of the Parcosaire. Now here's your historical fact to set the mood. Louis XV had an official mistress, the maîtresse en titre, complete with apartments near the king's and her own staff. But he also maintained a secret house, the Parcosaire, or Stag Park, where young women were kept, rotated and hidden from the public eye. The public, mostly. The court knew, the city gossiped, but officially, it was all a royal secret wrapped in satin and shame. You might start as a street girl, or the daughter of a minor noble. Someone spots you at the opera or while selling flowers, and you're brought to a nondescript building in Versailles. You're cleaned up, educated in etiquette, taught how to hold a glass of wine without showing your teeth, how to bat your lashes without looking common, you think you've made it. That's cute. Once you're selected, and your virginity confirmed because yes, it's that grim, you're brought to the park. The building is quiet, lavish, almost clinical in its luxury. You wait in a soft bed for a man who barely looks older than your grandfather but carries the fate of a nation in his lace-trimmed cuffs. He arrives. He nods. He might speak. He might not. You smile anyway. You have to. The king doesn't just want bodies. He wants control. These girls aren't allowed to form friendships. They're kept isolated. Sometimes they don't even know each other's names. And if one gets pregnant, she's quietly married off to a loyal officer or tucked away with a generous pension, and another girl arrives to replace her. Rotation, not romance. Here's your quirky fact. One of the most famous girls from the park, Marie-Louise O'Murphy, was painted nude by the court artist before she ever met the king. Her portrait was part of the recruitment strategy. She became his mistress at just 14. Let that sink in. The painting hangs in the Louvre now, soft pastels and pliant flesh, but it's really a resume wrapped in oil and scandal. Now let's talk about Madame de Pompadour because she changes the game. She starts as a commoner, Jeanne Poisson, but she studies art, music, literature and, most importantly, people. When she meets Louis XV, she doesn't just dazzle him in bed, she dazzles him in conversation. Within a year, she's named maîtresse en titre, granted a noble title, and installed in a palace apartment connected to his by a secret staircase. But the real twist? She stops sleeping with him after a while, and keeps all her power. That's right. Pompadour remains the king's confidant, advisor, and the grand orchestrator of his image long after their physical relationship ends. She arranges marriages, oversees the arts, and personally approves the girls brought to the Parc aux Cerfs. Some whisper she did it to keep the king busy, to hold on to her own influence. Others say she just understood the rules and rewrote them mid-game. Here's the scholarly debate for tonight. Was Madame de Pompadour a political genius, or just another high-ranking courtesan who happened to play her cards right? On one hand, she pushed forward Enlightenment thinkers, commissioned world-class architecture and brokered political alliances. On the other, she helped hollow out the monarchy's reputation by enabling Louis's detached, pleasure-soaked lifestyle while France inched toward revolution. Maybe both are true. Power doesn't have to wear a crown. Sometimes it wears rouge. And for the girls in the park, there's no glory, no portraits, no books. Most vanish from the record. Their names were erased even as their bodies were used to soothe a bored king and shield the real power behind a curtain of lace. When Louis XV died, alone and unpopular, his legacy rotted faster than his body. His grandson, Louis XVI, would inherit the mess. And you already know how that ends. Guillotines don't care about who kissed whom, but for a time, in those candlelit rooms, sex and statecraft blended until they were indistinguishable. Your moans became cover for military failures, your silence, the cost of national stability. You weren't courted, you were drafted. So tonight, as you drift off imagining Versailles bathed in candlelight and scandal, remember, someone once sat in that bed, powdered and perfumed, wondering if a single night might buy her freedom or seal her fate. You're in Paris now, and the candles are burning lower than they used to. The perfume still lingers, the wigs are still tall, but the shine on the monarchy is wearing off. You can feel it in the streets, in the press, in the eyes of the people watching you from behind market stalls and alley shadows. You're Marie Antoinette, or at least the public version of her, painted, powdered, polished, and paraded. Queen of France, Queen of Scandal, and whether you like it or not, your reputation has already started sharpening the blade of the guillotine. You didn't ask for this. You were born in Austria, a daughter of the formidable Empress Maria Theresa, and married off at just 14 to the awkward, indecisive Dauphin of France, Louis XVI. It was a peace treaty wrapped in a wedding veil. You arrive in Versailles as a foreigner, with little political power and even less understanding of the court you're expected to conquer. But the moment you set foot on that gilded stage, all eyes turn. You're young, beautiful and French enough when powdered correctly. So you play the role, at first. But Louis isn't exactly the romantic type. He's shy, heavy, prone to tinkering with locks more than women. For the first few years there's no sex at all. You're mocked for it, pitied for it, accused because of it. Is the marriage even real? Are you a failed queen? A frigid foreigner? Then suddenly, miracle, The bedroom thaws, and the children finally start arriving. But the damage is already done. You're too fashionable, too foreign, too visibly not suffering with the people. You become the scapegoat for everything wrong in France, and sex is the sharpest dagger they use to cut you down. Here's your historical fact. In the years leading up to the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette was the victim of an unprecedented smear campaign. Hundreds of pamphlets and engravings were circulated throughout France, called libelles, depicting her in graphic, pornographic scenes. She was drawn performing sexual acts with her brother-in-law, with guards, with nuns, with women, with multiple partners. She was accused of corrupting the morals of France from her velvet-lined boudoir. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter anymore. Your quirky fact. One of the most popular libelles of the time, titled La Reine Dévoilée, the Queen Unveiled, sold like hotcakes in Paris. It claimed to be a confession from one of your lovers, detailing your supposed lust, depravity, and secret affairs in meticulous, lurid detail. It was pure fiction, but the people devoured it. Because nothing sells revolution like a horny villainess in pearls. You build Petit Trianon, your own little paradise outside Versailles, where you can pretend to be a shepherdess with your inner circle. You wear muslin gowns and abandon corsets. The court rolls its eyes, the public sees only excess. You're trying to breathe, and all they see is another layer of detachment. Meanwhile, Louis is fumbling through policy and finances, and the people are starving. Bread prices spike, your jewellery sparkles too brightly. A certain diamond necklace scandal, where you weren't even directly involved, nearly blows the monarchy off its hinges. The public decides you're guilty anyway. They call you Madame Deficit, the Austrian whore, the poison at the heart of France. Now for the scholarly debate. Did Marie Antoinette ever try to wield her sexuality as a political tool, or was she simply a passive target of misogyny, nationalism, and a public hungry for blood? Some historians argue she leaned into flirtation at court, used her charm to curry favour, played roles in palace intrigue, and at least once tried to influence Louis to replace a minister she disliked. Others say she was largely apolitical, focused on her family, and totally unprepared for the level of vitriol she would face. Either way, what matters more is how others perceived her, and how they weaponized that perception until it snapped. By the time you're dragged back to Paris during the Women's March on Versailles, you're already a symbol, not a person, and not a flattering one. You're caricatured as a sexual glutton, a manipulative Jezebel who seduced the throne into decay. You try to stand tall, you try to be brave, but nothing can erase the years of printed lies soaked into the fabric of public opinion. And when the trial finally comes, it isn't about your spending habits or your diplomacy. It's about your body, about what you supposedly did with it, about what kind of woman, what kind of mother you really were. The prosecutors even accuse you of incest with your own son. You deny it. You cry out. The crowd doesn't care. They've already decided. Here's the final irony. You, who were so unfairly sexualized, are stripped of dignity completely. Your head is shaved, your hands are tied, you're carted through Paris in an open wagon, a pale mockery of your old royal processions. You climb the scaffold with shaking knees. They say you apologize to the executioner for stepping on his foot. Then the blade falls. The crowd cheers, but they don't really win. The France that follows is soaked in blood, chaos, and counter-executions, and the memory of your supposed decadence continues to echo, shaped less by fact than by fantasy. You weren't the villain they made you out to be, but in the end it didn't matter. So tonight, when you imagine Versailles and its flickering chandeliers, remember the queen whose reputation was destroyed not with armies or treaties, but with pamphlets, slander, and 1,000 filthy lies passed hand to hand. Sex was never your weapon, but it was the one used to kill you. You're in China now. Not the bustling neon-blurred cities of today, but a world of lacquered screens, moon gates, and courtyards quiet enough to hear your own breath. You're behind palace walls in the Forbidden City during the height of imperial power, where every move is watched, every breath carries consequence, and every glance could change the fate of a dynasty. You're not an empress, not yet. You're one of the many women brought into the court as a concubine, a consort, a shadow in a sea of silks. But if you play it right, if you understand the coded language of flattery, hierarchy, and ritual, your bed could become your battlefield, and you just might win. The harem of the Chinese imperial court was not unlike those in the Ottoman Empire, but colder, stricter, more suffocating in its precision. You're chosen young, perhaps 13 or 14, based on beauty, demeanour, and that ineffable glow the eunuchs call qi. You're renamed, renumbered, and ranked. Because your birth name, that belongs to the past. Here, you are an extension of the Son of Heaven, a petal on the grand chrysanthemum of the empire. But don't let the poetry fool you. You've just stepped into a bureaucracy of desire. Here's your historical fact. In the Qing dynasty, the emperor often had hundreds of women in his harem, divided into strict ranks: empress, noble consorts, concubines, attendants, and ladies-in-waiting. They lived in assigned rooms within the inner court, were rotated on scheduled nights to visit the emperor, and could not leave the palace unless dismissed or dead. The selection of these women was an imperial ritual called the Elegant Women Selection, and it happened every 3 years. It was less a courtship and more a census of beauty. Your quirky fact? The emperor didn't choose women at random. Before bed, eunuchs presented him with carved ivory or jade tablets, engraved with the names of eligible consorts. The emperor would flip one face up, and that lucky woman would be summoned, often carried, naked and wrapped in a yellow cloth, to his chambers. Why naked? To prove she was concealing no weapons. Romance. But here's where it gets complicated. The imperial bed wasn't just a bedroom, it was a throne with pillows, because if you became pregnant, everything changed. A son could mean elevation in status. A daughter? Less useful, but still leverage. And if your child survived, and the emperor took a liking, you might one day rise to Empress Dowager, the power behind the curtain, the one everyone bows to, even emperors. And now enter the legend, Wu Zetian. She didn't just sleep her way to the top, she bulldozed her way there. Starting as a low-ranking concubine of Emperor Tizong in the 7th century, she was initially destined for a life of quiet servitude. But when Taizong died, she did something that broke every rule in the book. She became the concubine of his son, the next emperor. Scandalous. Absolutely. But effective. She bore him children. She whispered in his ear. She inserted herself into religious debates, court policies, and state rituals. And eventually, she didn't just influence the throne, she became it. Wu Zetian is the only woman in Chinese history to ever officially rule as emperor in her own name. Not empress, not regent, emperor. And she got there by mastering palace politics, seduction, and, according to her enemies, the subtle art of removing inconvenient people, like rival concubines, or even her own children. Did she really do all that? Hard to say. A lot of those records were written by the men she outmaneuvered. That's the scholarly debate for this section. Wu Zetian. Ruthless tyrant or brilliant reformer? The sources paint her as bloodthirsty, vindictive, sexually manipulative. But historians now push back, suggesting that much of this was retroactive slander. After all, male rulers could execute and sleep their way through court without being called monsters. Wu promoted meritocracy, reformed the bureaucracy, and even supported Buddhism in ways that reshaped China's religious landscape. But yes, she also likely had a few rivals, removed, along the way. It's lonely at the top. Back in your own imperial century, you walk on felted paths so your footsteps don't disturb the quiet. You bow at exact angles. You keep your face calm, your hands folded, your thoughts tightly wrapped inside your skull like a secret letter. You watch the Empress pass, her robes trailing like clouds, and wonder, could that be me? Tonight you're summoned, your carved tablet has been flipped, you're bathed in chrysanthemum water, your hair arranged like a lotus bloom, and you're presented before the Emperor. He barely looks at you, but you smile, just a little, and speak softly. You've studied his poetry. You recite a line. It catches him off guard. That's how it starts. In the coming weeks, you're called more often. Your rank rises. The others watch you from behind their fans with either admiration or calculation. You don't trust any of them. Good. That means you're learning. You find allies in the lower ranks, maids who owe you favours, eunuchs who can be bribed with gossip. You begin to understand the invisible current running beneath the court. You learn how to swim in it. And maybe you win. Maybe you outlast the rivals, bear a healthy son, rise to noble consort, then Empress Dowager. Maybe one day you write edicts while the Emperor, your son, your puppet, nods beside you. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you fall out of favour, get accused of witchcraft, sent away, poisoned, forgotten. But for now, as the silk sheets rustle and the perfume of camellia clings to your skin, you remember, sex isn't just survival here, it's strategy, it's structure, it's statecraft. And in this empire, even the softest whisper behind a screen can shake the world. The mirrors still gleam in Versailles, but the woman reflected in them tonight is more than just a mistress. She's a patron, a power broker, a queen without a crown, and her name is Madame de Pompadour. You're her now. Stepping through gilded doors in silks that whisper with each stride, not just to be looked at, but to be listened to. You're here not merely to please the king, but to shape the kingdom. You already know Louis XV better than anyone else. His fears, his failures, the exact way he likes his eggs and his empire. And while France may still believe the king wears the crown, you're the one adjusting its tilt behind the scenes. You didn't start here, of course. You were born Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, daughter of a shady tax collector and a mother with big dreams. A fortune teller once told her you'd win a king's heart, and apparently that was enough for her to shove you into an education that rivaled any noble boy's. You studied art, literature, music, dance. You learned the pulse of power long before you ever stepped foot into a salon, and by the time you met Louis you weren't just prepared, you were already irresistible. You met him at a masked ball. He was the king. You were dressed as Diana, goddess of the hunt. The man had no chance. Here's your historical fact. Madame de Pompadour became Louis XV's official mistress in 1745, and she held his favour for nearly 2 decades. What made her unusual, borderline terrifying, to some at court, was that even after their sexual relationship ended, she remained the central figure in the king's life. His counsellor, his closest friend, his therapist, if we're being honest. She was the first mistress to maintain her position without sharing the royal bed. Quirky fact. You were so aware of the importance of your role that you hired your own portraitist, François Boucher, to depict you not as a reclining nude or court ornament, but as a reader, a thinker, a philosopher with a quill in hand and books stacked around you. You were selling your own narrative before PR was even a thing. Now let's talk about your impact, because you didn't just decorate Versailles, you redirected France. You sponsored writers like Voltaire, you championed the encyclopédistes, you helped bring Rococo art to life, reshaped the porcelain industry at Sèvres, and smoothed the brittle egos of dozens of ministers and diplomats. And yes, you helped choose them too. You advised on matters of war, appointed generals, helped draft treaties. You knew everyone who mattered and made sure they knew you mattered more. But it wasn't all powdered roses and sonnets. Your biggest political gamble, the diplomatic revolution of 1756. France realigned itself with Austria, a former enemy, through a series of agreements Pompadour helped finesse. This led directly into the 7 Years' War, an absolute disaster for France. Colonies lost, money bled, public fury ignited. The people didn't blame the king, they blamed you, always you. And here's the scholarly debate. Was Madame de Pompadour a visionary or a delusional social climber who dragged France into unnecessary conflict? Supporters argue you stabilised a king who was otherwise spiralling into apathy, shored up the arts, and held court together in a time when France desperately needed glue. Critics say you manipulated foreign alliances, played favourites in military appointments, and made decisions above your station, bad ones too. But here's what no one debates. You had the power. No noble birth, no husband beside a throne, just brains, charm, and a terrifying capacity to stay relevant. You weaponized sex just long enough to enter the palace, and then you transcended it entirely. Because when you stopped being the king's lover, you didn't fade into obscurity like the others. You built a new role, one that no one had quite seen before, a semi-official advisor, a cultural minister without title, a mistress emerita who could still command the attention of generals and whisper policy in the king's ear while pouring his tea. And you weren't subtle about it either. You commissioned works depicting you as everything from a noble heroine to a celestial muse. You made the public look at you, even as they snarled. You even built your own getaway, Petit Trianon, long before Marie Antoinette would later claim it as her personal escape. And through it all, you carried yourself with poise. Even when the pamphlets came, those ever-present libels, mocking your origins, your power, your lovers, real or imagined, your supposed corruption. Even when court factions plotted your downfall, even when your own health began to crack beneath the pressure. Because here's the last tender twist of it all. You were dying the whole time. Behind the powdered cheeks and tight corsets, your lungs were giving up. Tuberculosis, a slow, humiliating decline. But you never let the king see you in pain. Not really. You kept the gowns spotless, the perfume strong, the voice steady. When you died at age 42, the king, normally cold, almost allergic to sentiment, reportedly wept. He ordered her body to be taken out of Versailles quickly, because he couldn't bear the sight. Then he shut himself in his room and refused to speak for days. So tonight, you sit at your writing desk, quill in hand, composing another letter to a general, a minister, a monarch. You know your influence is finite, but you'll leave a mark. The court may sneer, the people may hate, but the history books, they'll remember. You made seduction a stepping stone, not a destination. You used the bed as a beginning, not a crown, and you proved, once and for all, that a woman with ambition doesn't need to lie beneath a king to rule the room. Tonight, we step out of the palace and into the spotlight. The lights are low, the music slow, and you're centre stage, every eye following your hips as they sway like prophecy. You're exotic, mysterious, dangerous, or at least that's what they think, and that's exactly what you want. Because you are Mata Hari, the dancer turned spy whose name would echo across Europe as both a temptress and a traitor. But right now, you're just a woman trying to survive the modern world's deadliest war by dancing your way through its most powerful men. Born Margrethe Zell in the Netherlands, you didn't start out as a mystery. You started as a child with a flair for drama and a hunger for more. A bad marriage to a violent husband sent you fleeing to Paris. There you reinvented yourself, took the name Mata Hari. Eye of the Day in Malay, claimed to be a Javanese princess, trained in sacred temple dances. Never mind that you learned the choreography in a cold Paris apartment. The fantasy worked, it sold, and soon you were performing for generals, diplomats and princes, one sheer veil at a time. Here's your historical fact. Mata Hari rose to fame in the early 1900s as one of Europe's most celebrated Orientalist performers. Her dances blended myth, sex and theatre in a way that had upper-class men convinced they were witnessing something both erotic and spiritual. She toured across Europe, becoming as famous for her lovers as for her performances. And as war crept over the continent, she stepped off the stage and into the shadows. That's when the real danger began. The First World War was a paranoia machine. Borders were shifting, loyalties were fluid, and everyone was desperate for information. You were already sleeping with high-ranking officers on both sides, French generals, German officers, even a Russian or two, and that meant you were perfectly placed to become a spy. Or maybe you already were. Quirky fact. You never used a gun, never cracked a code. You didn't wear a trench coat or hide messages in your garter, but the intelligence world was obsessed with you. The Germans assigned you the codename H21. The French recruited you as a double agent, and when things went south, both sides denied you. The web of seduction you once controlled became the net that dragged you under. Now for the debate. Was Mata Hari really a spy, or just a scapegoat? Some historians argue she passed along minor scraps of information, more pillow talk than espionage, nothing that shifted the war. Others insist she was feeding Germany vital intelligence, playing the French like a fiddle, and betraying the very countries that paid for her velvet-lined lifestyle. But the truth is murky, and it's murkier still because she was a woman, a foreigner, and famous. When she was arrested by the French in 1917, it wasn't the evidence that sealed her fate, it was the optics. A foreign courtesan dancing half naked for generals while French soldiers bled in the trenches? That was all the jury needed. The trial was a farce. The press had already convicted you. The idea that a woman could use sex to unmake nations was too tempting to resist. You denied the charges. You said you were loyal to France, that yes, you loved powerful men, that yes, you made your living by enchantment. But espionage? You said that was not the same as treason. It didn't matter. They shot you at dawn. The details are strangely theatrical. You wore a chic outfit, no blindfold, no begging. You blew a kiss to the firing squad, and when the bullet struck, you reportedly collapsed without a sound. The nun assigned to witness your death said she had never seen anyone so brave. Your body was never claimed. Your head was embalmed and supposedly sent to a medical museum, which later claimed to have misplaced it. The rest of you, gone, like a wisp of perfume from the sleeve of a vanished dancer. But what remains is the myth. Matahari, the femme fatale, the seductress spy, the woman who danced her way into secrets and out of history's favour. And yet, you were never truly that woman. Not exactly. You were a survivor, a shapeshifter, someone who understood that the body could be both weapon and disguise. The irony. In the war rooms and intelligence dossiers of Europe, real spies, men with blood on their hands and codes in their pockets, slipped away quietly. But you died for the story they needed you to be, for the fear you embodied, for the idea that a woman who sleeps with power must be dangerous. So tonight the music has stopped. The audience is gone, but you stand in the spotlight anyway, 1 foot arched, one hand lifted, eyes half closed in that final pose. You never owned an army, a throne, or a title, but for a moment you made the whole world watch. You're in Venice now, but not the postcard kind, the real one, slick with canal water and whispered deals, where every flickering lantern masks a secret. The air smells like salt, rotting wood, and possibility. It's the 18th century, and you're Giacomo Casanova. Yes, that Casanova. The name that's been dragged through every joke about romance and seduction, stretched into cliché, and misremembered as nothing more than a walking libido. But the truth is sharper, darker, more strategic. You're not just a lover, you're a survivor, and sex is your passport into places you were never supposed to go. Let's set the scene. Born illegitimate, fatherless and sickly, you're sent to study for the priesthood because, frankly, that's the only option a boy like you has. But religion doesn't suit you. The rituals are beautiful, sure, but the restrictions, not so much. You get kicked out of seminary for being too curious about everything, especially women. But what really sets you apart isn't your appetite. It's your mind. You're clever, ridiculously clever. And you realise early that knowledge, charm, and a perfectly timed smile can get you into rooms where wealth and power live. Sex is just the entry fee. Here's your historical fact. Casanova wasn't just a serial seducer. He was a writer, philosopher, gambler, spy, and conman. He rubbed shoulders with Voltaire and Catherine the Great. He read voraciously, translated classical texts, and navigated European courts like a one-man intelligence network. His 12-volume autobiography, Histoire de ma vie, is one of the most detailed and bizarre memoirs in history, and much of it reads like softcore espionage. The people you sleep with? They aren't always beautiful, and they're rarely random. Sometimes it's about lust, sure, but more often it's about access. That countess in Vienna, she's bored and married to a general. You make her feel alive again, and she slips you information about troop movements. The young novice in Rome, she's not as innocent as she looks, and her uncle's a bishop with secrets to protect. Every encounter is layered, strategic, even if it's also dripping in champagne and lace. Here's your quirky fact. You once broke out of Venice's most notorious prison, Il Piombi, by faking illness, hiding metal tools in Bibles, and charming a guard into looking the other way. Your reward? Instant celebrity status across Europe. You became a symbol of daring, and suddenly every noblewoman from Paris to Prague wanted to say they'd known you, in every sense of the word. But you weren't untouchable. Far from it. You burned bridges almost as fast as you built them. You cheated at cards, borrowed money you never returned, dressed like nobility when you were down to your last coin. You sweet-talked your way into palaces and then got thrown out when the bills came due. And sometimes, you didn't just seduce, you manipulated. There's one story about a girl, Henriette, who might have actually broken your heart. A rare thing, that. She wasn't dazzled by your act. She matched you in wit, played your games better than you, and when she left, she didn't leave a forwarding address. It stung. You wrote about her for years. In the end, she may have been the only one who got away clean. Now here's the debate that still lingers in smoky lecture halls and footnoted essays. Was Casanova a romantic libertine or a narcissistic predator? Modern scholars are split. Some say he was a man of his time, playing within the boundaries of 18th century court culture, where seduction was practically sport. Others point out the power imbalances in many of his encounters, especially the ones involving women too young, too dependent, or too dazzled to consent in any meaningful way. The uncomfortable truth is that Casanova's legacy, like many others in this series, is a contradiction. He saw himself as a lover of women, but many of those women were stepping stones, not equals. But in your eyes, In your own words, every woman was a world. You described their faces in detail, their intelligence, their frustrations with the roles society forced them to play. You weren't blind to their cages. You just knew how to slip into them like smoke. So where does this end for you? Not in glory, that's for sure. By the time you're old, the world has moved on. The Enlightenment burned itself into bureaucracy, and your charm no longer works like it used to. You end up as a librarian in a bohemian castle, broke, cranky, and writing out your story in looped handwriting, hoping someone, someday, might understand that you were more than the jokes made about your name. And they did. They still do. Tonight, the legend of Casanova is a warning and a wink. A reminder that sex, in the right hands, can be currency, key, and weapon all at once. That being the lover doesn't mean being powerless, but it doesn't mean being innocent either. You moved through drawing rooms and boudoirs like a ghost in embroidered shoes, seducing your way into the secrets of Europe. And when you left, the sheets were still warm and the door was always just barely open. Tonight you're in a battlefield dressed like a ballroom. Gilded cannons, velvet chairs, maps instead of menus, and seated at the head of the table in the centre of this delicate chaos is you, Napoleon Bonaparte. General, emperor, self-made god of war. You've turned Europe into a chessboard of blood and you're not even 30 yet. But for all your genius with armies, all your brilliance in battle formations and codes of law, there's one front you never fully conquer, the bedroom. And tonight, we're going to talk about how your rise was paved not just with bullets, but with bed sheets. Because if anyone tells you Napoleon didn't care about sex, they're only half right. You didn't care about decorum. You didn't have time for long courtships or pretense. But you cared, fiercely, about the way power shifted under a silk canopy, the way alliances could bloom or wither depending on who was whispering in your ear as the candles flickered low. Let's rewind to your first great love. Her name? Josephine. Well, actually her name was Marie-Joseph Rose Tachet de la Pagerie, but you refused to call her that. You renamed her Josephine because that's what you wanted her to be. Even your lovers, it seems, were redrawn to fit your script. She was 6 years older, a widow of an executed aristocrat with 2 children and a complicated past. She was also the most seductive woman in Paris. Josephine walked into rooms like perfume. You wrote her letters from the front lines. Wild, desperate, embarrassingly emotional letters, filled with phrases like, "I wake consumed with thoughts of you," and "a kiss on your heart, 1,000 kisses everywhere else." Yeah, everywhere else. Here's your historical fact. Napoleon married Josephine in 1796, just before his first major Italian campaign. Their relationship was passionate but uneven. While he was away conquering Europe, she had affairs, openly. It enraged him. He lashed out, obsessed, even contemplated divorce. But when he returned home and saw her, all was forgiven. At least for a while. That was the cycle. Conquest, distance, betrayal, return, rinse and repeat. Your quirky fact. Napoleon was, how shall we say, extremely enthusiastic in bed, but not exactly known for stamina. He'd often arrive unannounced at Josephine's chambers, regardless of the hour, still smelling of battlefield and ambition. One of her maids once claimed she had only 15 minutes to prepare the room, and her mistress before the emperor burst in like a hurricane in boots. Let's just say, intimacy with Napoleon was rarely subtle. But power makes demands, and eventually your desire for a legacy outweighed your loyalty. Josephine couldn't give you a son. You tried. She tried. The court whispered. You needed an heir to solidify your new dynasty, and no amount of passion could override politics. So, you did the unthinkable. You divorced her. Not cruelly, though, that's the strangest part. You wept. She wept. You gave her a title, wealth, land. You made sure she was taken care of. But you left her. And then, in an even more calculated move, you married Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria, a teenage princess chosen not for love but for lineage. She was young, fertile, politically ideal, and just like that you went from scandalous lover to respectable husband, on paper. And yes, she gave you a son, Napoleon II. For a moment you felt untouchable, a true emperor, the bloodline secured, but your control began to slip. While you fought half of Europe, people whispered that you weren't just a tyrant, you were a man who weaponized sex like a general. You arranged marriages for your siblings like treaties. You gave mistresses titles, then discarded them when they lost their shine. Some women adored you, others despised you. A few, like Pauline Forez, a painter's wife turned battlefield mistress, became symbols of your unpredictability. You seduced her during your Egyptian campaign and had her husband sent back to France. Not subtle. Now here's the scholarly debate. Did sex really matter to Napoleon's rise and fall, or was it just background noise to his larger political machine? Some argue that his sexual relationships were deeply tied to his image, equal parts romantic hero and virile conqueror. That the myth of Napoleon wasn't just military, it was masculine. His power in bed mirrored his power on the battlefield. Quick, decisive, domineering. Others say it was distraction. That his failures in intimacy mirrored his failures in diplomacy. That for all his control, he couldn't manage his own heart. And when Josephine died in 1814, shortly before his own political collapse, many claimed the empire fell with her. Because yes, your downfall came swiftly. Defeat in Russia, betrayals, exile, the throne slipping like silk through your fingers. You died alone on the island of St. Helena, surrounded by aides, coughing blood into handkerchiefs, dreaming of horses, maps, and maybe, just maybe, of Josephine. Your last words. France, the army, head of the army, Josephine. Of all your victories, she was the one you couldn't keep. Of all the battles, hers was the only one you never won. So tonight you don't wear a crown. You wear her memory. You walk through candlelit corridors of your mind, past maps and medals, and you remember what it was like to want someone so badly it made you forget who you were. You built an empire, but it's the broken heart people still write songs about. The torches are burning low tonight, casting long, drowsy shadows across packed earth and painted skin. You're far from European palaces now. No wigs, no corsets, no powdered scandals whispered behind fans. You're in pre-colonial Africa, in a royal court where power doesn't wear satin. It wears iron and beads, and it walks barefoot through sacred groves. Tonight you're a queen, and your authority doesn't come in spite of your sexuality. It flows directly from it. You're a spiritual conduit, a ruler of blood and legacy, and your body is not just yours. It belongs to the ancestors, to the gods, to the land itself. This isn't some foreign twist on court politics. It's its own complex system. Depending on where you are, Benin, Dahomey, Ashanti, Buganda, Zulu, royalty is expressed in radically different ways. But in many of these societies, sex and sacred authority are not separate. They are entangled. And you're not just a queen. You're the embodiment of lineage, a living bridge between the seen and unseen. Let's drop you into Dahomey, 18th century. You're the Capogito, the mother of the nation, co-ruler alongside the king, not subordinate. Your role isn't ornamental, it's spiritual and judicial. People kneel to you. Men ask for your blessing. You oversee female warriors, yes, female warriors, and pass judgment that even generals respect. And when you speak, people listen not just because of who you are, but because of who moves through you. Here's your historical fact. In Dahomey, modern-day Benin, the Capogito was a political and spiritual leader, often a woman of common origin elevated by her wisdom, charisma, and connection to the divine. She often served as co-ruler with the king, a balance of masculine and feminine forces that was critical to the stability of the kingdom. Sexual purity, in the European sense, was irrelevant. What mattered was potency, sexual, spiritual, political. Now here's a little-known, wonderfully strange fact. In some African royal courts, intimacy wasn't hidden, it was ritualized. In the Lozi kingdom of Barotseland, now Zambia, the king's sexual energy was thought to influence the rains. Sacred rituals involved symbolic unions between the king and nature spirits, often expressed through public performances or dances that evoked fertility and cosmological harmony. Imagine that. A kingdom where sex wasn't scandalous, it was a divine utility. But back to you. In many traditions, your sexual autonomy isn't questioned, it's required. You might have multiple husbands, you might take lovers. If you're a spirit medium queen, like some found in the Shona or Yoruba traditions, your body becomes a temporary home for the ancestors, and your desires aren't just your own. They're sacred directives, a god's hunger, borrowed through your skin. Yet here comes the scholarly debate. How much of this sexual power was real, and how much has been misinterpreted or deliberately erased by colonial observers. European missionaries and colonial officers were horrified by what they saw. Women who ruled, women who took lovers publicly, women who weren't bound by Christian morality. So they wrote them off as pagan, immoral, or worse, primitive. Entire political systems were dismissed because they didn't fit into a Western model where sex was either sinful or subjugated. Modern scholars are still sorting through that mess. What is performance and what is prophecy? What was real empowerment and what was misunderstood ritual? But one thing is clear. For many African queens and priestesses, sexuality was never a weakness. It was a current, a source, a language that spoke to the gods. And that brings us to a name, Queen Nzinga of Nongo and Matamba, modern-day Angola. Nzinga was a 17th century ruler who negotiated with the Portuguese like a lion in silk, sat on her male advisors' backs during diplomatic meetings because they refused to offer her a chair, and reportedly kept a male harem dressed in women's clothing. These men were called her concubines, and she treated them exactly as European kings treated their female ones, with ownership, affection, and complete control. Was it theatre? Absolutely. But it was also rebellion. Nzinga used the performance of sexuality to invert colonial expectations, to reassert her autonomy in a world that was rapidly trying to erase it. She refused to be a victim of Christian morality, and instead wielded it like a broken sword, taunting her enemies with their own rules, while living by her own. So tonight, you sit beneath the stars, surrounded by drummers and attendants, your body oiled with shea and your arms heavy with gold. A dancer moves in front of you, mimicking the rhythms of harvest and rainfall, hips describing a story older than language. You're watching, but also participating. Everything here is cyclical. Breath, sex, leadership. It's all one thread. There is no shame, only stewardship. You might summon a lover to your hut tonight, or you might not. You're not waiting for a king to choose you. You choose, and in doing so, you keep the land balanced, the people fed, and the gods satisfied. Your body's not a battleground, it's a compass. And unlike the marble palaces of Europe, where sex is wrapped in scandal and shadows, here it lives in the open air. Here, your power doesn't hide beneath the sheets, it sings beside the fire. Tonight we descend into marble halls echoing with whispered Latin and the rustle of silk vestments. Candles flicker beside gold-trimmed icons, incense curls through the air, and you're not a queen, not a mistress, not even a crowned head. You're something else entirely. You're a pope, or you're sleeping with one, or you're the niece of one, being quietly prepared for marriage to your cousin to ensure that your family's grip on divine power doesn't slip. Because in Renaissance Rome, the holiest city in Christendom, the most sacred institution on earth, the Catholic Church, ran on sex like it ran on tithes. If you grew up thinking the Vatican was a celibate fortress of holy men humming hymns, buckle up. The papal courts of the 15th and 16th centuries were more Game of Thrones than Gospel of John. You're in the thick of it now, where cardinal robes hide dynastic ambitions, mistresses bear future bishops, and nepotism isn't a sin, it's policy. And sex? It's not just happening behind closed doors, it's woven directly into the political machinery of the church. Start with the Borgia family, because of course we're starting with the Borgias. Rodrigo Borgia, who becomes Pope Alexander VI in 1492, fathers multiple children while climbing the ranks of the church. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't even hide it. He openly installs his son Cesare as a cardinal, his other son Juan as a military commander, and his daughter Lucrezia. Well, she's a whole story of her own. Here's your historical fact. Alexander VI used his position not just to shepherd souls, but to build a family dynasty through political marriages, land grabs, and careful sexual alliances. The term nepotism itself originates from the Latin nepos, meaning nephew, which in this case often meant my illegitimate son who I'm pretending is my sister's kid. Practical. And Lucrezia? Oh, she's your quirky fact tonight because her life was like a Renaissance fever dream of myth, slander, and occasional truth. Betrothed at 11, married off 3 times, rumoured to have been her father's lover unproven, her brother's lover also unproven, and the poisoner of half of Rome, she almost certainly wasn't. But the image of her, a blonde beauty with a chalice of arsenic in one hand and a prayer book in the other, was irresistible to the public. Lucrezia was more likely a pawn. but a smart one. She played the role her family needed: political bride, gracious hostess, duchess, peacemaker. Later, as Duchess of Ferrara, she became a patron of the arts, a respected ruler, and, shockingly, a fairly competent administrator. But the whispers never stopped. In Renaissance Europe, a powerful woman without a veil was always assumed to be ruling by sex, not sense. And what about you? Maybe you're the mistress of a cardinal, kept in an elegant apartment paid for by charitable donations. Maybe you're a courtesan in Rome, gifted jewels and titles for your loyalty and discretion. Or maybe you're a pope's niece. And by niece, we mean probably daughter. You're married off at 16 to some regional noble who's promised to back your uncle's policies in exchange for land. You wear white at your wedding, but everyone knows you're carrying more than a bouquet. You're carrying the future of a papal alliance. Here's where the scholarly debate heats up like a basilica on fire. Were these papal liaisons simply corruption in action, or were they an adaptation to the real politic of Renaissance Europe? The church controlled enormous wealth and land but couldn't pass it on to children, officially. Celibacy was required for priests, bishops, popes, but power demanded succession. So the solution was elegant, if morally slippery. Don't acknowledge your children. Call them nephews. Call them nieces. Give them castles. Marry them into dukedoms. They'll know what they owe you. In the Borgia era alone, papal nieces and nephews were treated like royalty. Lucretia's marriages realigned kingdoms. Cesare Borgia helped invent modern political strategy, and was Machiavelli's muse for the prince, by the way. These weren't background players. These were major dynastic figures, born in sin, baptized in silk. And don't think this was just a Borgia thing. The Medici popes, Leo X and Clement VII, did the same. The Farnese Pope, Paul III, he made his teenage grandson a cardinal. Family dinners were basically strategy sessions in red velvet. Sex in this world wasn't just a scandal, it was infrastructure. So tonight, you're standing under the dome of St. Peter's, but you're not praying. You're planning. You're wondering if your daughter can be married to that German prince. You're wondering if the rumours about your cousin's affair with the French ambassador can be used to your advantage. You're wondering if that pretty soprano in the choir knows how to keep a secret, or wants to be paid to. You might wear a cassock or a corset or both. You might pretend your son is your secretary. You might confess your sins with a wink, knowing full well the man behind the curtain has a mistress of his own. Because in this church, purity is for the pamphlets. Behind the incense and Latin chants, you know exactly what runs this place: blood, lust, and power. Sex isn't a deviation from holiness here. It's the scaffolding that holds the holy facade together. The bloodlines are thin tonight. Too thin, and you know it. You're perched on a gold-threaded cushion in a cold chamber somewhere in Habsburg Europe, and everyone around you is your cousin. No, really, everyone. You're a royal, and your last name might be Habsburg or Bourbon or Ptolemy, or maybe all three at once because your family tree doesn't branch, it loops. And tonight, as you study the man you're supposed to marry, who is also your uncle's son and your mother's second cousin, you feel that quiet, nauseating realization settle in. In this palace, love is not a possibility. It's a mathematical calculation. And sex is statecraft, and the state wants more of your blood. Literally. Because this is the world of royal incest. Not the kind whispered in soap operas, but the kind written into centuries of dynastic contracts. If the crown must remain pure, then the pool of acceptable partners shrinks faster than a silk doublet in the rain. And what's left? Cousins, siblings, nieces, nephews, aunts. You don't need romance. You need heirs who won't disrupt the bloodline. That's your role. A vessel for dynastic preservation, even if it means sleeping with someone who shares your great-grandparents. Your historical fact tonight is both famous and tragic. The Habsburg dynasty of Spain and Austria practiced generations of close-kin marriage to keep power consolidated. Charles II of Spain, born in 1661, was the result of so much inbreeding that his family tree looks more like a circle. He suffered from severe physical deformities, mental disabilities, and was unable to produce an heir. His autopsy reported that his heart was the size of a peppercorn, and his body did not contain a single drop of blood. A poetic flourish, but you get the point. The quirky fact: Charles's pedigree was so tangled that his grandmother was also his aunt, and his parents were uncle and niece. That's not exaggeration. That's paperwork. The Habsburg jaw, that infamous protruding chin seen in portraits for generations, was not just a cosmetic quirk. It was a warning sign of relentless, genetically damaging inbreeding. And yet, it was seen as a badge of purity. Royal flesh folded in on itself to preserve divine right. This is where the scholarly debate takes a darker turn. Was this just ignorance of genetics? Or was it deliberate? Did monarchies knowingly risk deformity and disease to maintain their exclusive lineages? Or did they truly believe that noble blood was so special, so ordained, that no marriage outside it could ever be considered valid? Some argue it was theological. The idea that kings and queens were chosen by God meant their bloodlines were semi-sacred. To dilute them was to offend the heavens. Others point to power structures. Marrying outside the inner circle meant inviting foreign claims, outsider influence, or even rebellion. And so they married in, over and over, until the bodies broke. You tonight might be a princess of Austria being married to your cousin in Spain. You've seen him once. He's pale, gaunt, speaks with a lisp, and gags at the smell of cooked meat. You smile anyway. You curtsy. You slip into the marriage bed knowing it's your duty to let this awkward stranger attempt an heir. You're 15. He's 13. Neither of you understands how this is supposed to work, but the midwives are already waiting outside the door to check the sheets. And here's where it gets even more surreal. In some courts, the bloodline wasn't just protected, it was obsessed over. Take the Ptolemaic dynasty of ancient Egypt, for instance. Cleopatra, yes, that Cleopatra, was the product of multiple sibling marriages across generations. Her own marriage was to her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. It wasn't about love, it was about legitimacy. Because the divine rulers of Egypt were supposed to mirror the gods, who, in mythology, married their siblings to maintain cosmic balance. To the outside world, this looked grotesque. To the Ptolemies, it looked like order. Even in medieval and early modern Europe, cousin marriage wasn't frowned upon. It was expected. Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had been married to his brother Arthur first. Their marriage had to be annulled based on whether or not it had been consummated. Why? Because marrying your brother's widow required papal permission, and the theological gymnastics were exhausting. But back to you. You sit still during the ceremony. You listen as the Latin words bind you, not just to your husband, but to centuries of genetic roulette. You smile for the paintings, you accept the congratulations, and then you are ushered into the chamber where the real duty begins. You might conceive, you might not. If you don't, the blame will land on you. Always. And if the child is born sickly... Silent glances pass across the room. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows the blood is too tight now, because royal incest was never about lust. It was about lineage, about control, about keeping strangers from the throne, and in the process, it created generations of rulers too fragile to rule and queens too young to say no. Tonight, as the fire crackles beside your wedding bed, you look at the boy beside you, the cousin, the stranger, and you both know what's expected. The future of the realm lies in your shared blood, your obedient bodies, and your willingness to play this brutal arithmetic again and again. No, because in the end, power doesn't care if it walks with a limp or drools in court. It only cares that it stays in the family. The paper doors slide shut behind you, and for a moment the only sound is your own breath. Tatami beneath your feet, incense in the air, a fan flicks somewhere in the distance. You're in Japan now, not the hyper-urban skyline of the present, but the structured, whisper-soft elegance of the imperial court. This is Heian-era Kyoto, where silk sleeves trail across polished floors, every gesture is choreography, and power rarely shouts, it suggests. You're a lady of the court, maybe a consort, maybe a poet, maybe both. In this world, status is everything, but sex. Sex is complicated. Because here, intimacy is layered in subtlety. It's not about bodies colliding, it's about glances exchanged between lantern shadows, about who composes the better love poem, about who leaves their fan just barely askew after a night visit. Here, power doesn't walk in with armour, it floats in with perfume. Let's set the scene. The Heian period, roughly 794 to 1185, is considered Japan's golden age of courtly culture. The capital is serene. The aristocracy obsesses over beauty and etiquette to the point of madness. People judge you by your handwriting. Hair length is a status symbol, and the highest form of seduction. Exchanging waka, short, 5-line poems that contain heartbreak, innuendo, political shade, and spiritual longing, all in 31 syllables. Your historical fact tonight. In the Heian court, sexual relationships were often fluid and strategically significant. Polygamy was normal for the nobility. Men, especially the emperor and high-ranking courtiers, would take multiple wives and lovers, many of whom lived separately. Romantic liaisons were typically conducted at night, and a woman's prestige increased dramatically if the man returned more than once. If he stayed until dawn, a real power move. But this wasn't just a free-for-all. Everything was coded. A man could climb the ranks of court not just through birth, but by aligning himself with the right woman. If you were a high-ranking lady, being chosen as the emperor's consort, especially if you bore him a son, meant influence not just for you, but your entire family. You were the political entry point. Your bed was a gate to the throne. Here's your quirky fact. Night visits, yobai, were a formalized tradition. Men would sneak into women's quarters under cover of darkness, sometimes climbing in through partially open shutters, and the women were expected to feign sleep. If the man was welcome, she might stir. If not, she would remain still, and he'd quietly leave. Morning after letters were mandatory. The quality of your calligraphy could make or break the entire affair. And in the middle of this atmosphere of veiled intimacy stands the most famous female writer in Japanese history, Murasaki Shikibu. She's the author of The Tale of Genji, widely considered the world's first novel. It follows the life and many, many romantic entanglements of a fictional prince, Genji, as he navigates love, politics, and heartbreak. The book is soaked in emotional realism, how people deceive each other, how longing shapes destiny, how seduction isn't just about lust, but about understanding another person's soul. Murasaki herself was a court lady, sharp-tongued and reluctant about court life. Her diaries suggest she wasn't always comfortable with the flirtation and spectacle of the palace, but she understood it deeply enough to immortalize it in prose. Her work offers an uncensored inside view of how sex and court maneuvering were tangled like silk threads, delicate, beautiful, and impossible to separate. Now, the scholarly debate. Was Heian court culture empowering for women, or just a prettier version of patriarchal control? Some argue that women in this world had unusual autonomy. They could own property, write and publish under their own names, and influence political appointments through romantic relationships. Others argue that while women had visibility, they were still instruments of dynastic ambition, decorative and useful, but ultimately disposable. A man's second visit could elevate a woman's status. His silence could ruin her. And don't forget, some of the most powerful women of the era, like Fujiwara no Michiko and Fujiwara no Shoshi, weren't just consorts. They were kingmakers, royal mothers, poets, and abbesses. They made alliances through sex, yes, but they held on to power through wit, education, and ruthless tact. So tonight, you kneel beside a low writing desk, brush in hand, composing your response to a lover's poem. You're wrapped in layers of kimono, each a different shade, carefully chosen to reflect the season and your mood. The ink smells of pine. You pause to consider whether to be coy, honest, or devastating. A clever turn of phrase might draw him back, or warn him off, or elevate you in the eyes of his rivals. Because this letter isn't just about desire, it's about control. The paper crinkles softly as you roll the scroll, seal it, and pass it through a carved screen to a waiting servant. Somewhere, your lover waits for your words. Somewhere, another woman reads his, and wonders if you're the reason he never came back. In this world, sex is a letter under a pillow, a blossom placed carefully in a sleeve, a missed visit that echoes louder than a scream. It's everything and nothing, sacred and strategic, and always half hidden behind a paper wall. You may not wear a crown, but tonight, with your ink still wet and your words sharp as a blade, you rule in silence. You're back in Europe, but this time it's louder, drunker, and frankly a lot more fun. The year is 1660, and England is recovering from a decade of puritanical gloom under Oliver Cromwell. No dancing, no theatre, no flirting, and absolutely no royal mistresses. Well, that's about to change. Because you are Charles II, freshly restored to the throne, and you've decided to turn England into a party. Politics? Sure. War? Eventually. But first, sex, scandal, and the grand reopening of everything deliciously forbidden. Welcome to the Restoration, where your mistresses aren't just lovers, they're influencers, and they're playing the game as hard as you are. You swagger back into London like a man uncorking the country. You're tall, dark, cynical, and charming in a way that makes even your enemies grudgingly impressed. You survived exile, schemed your way across European courts, and now the crown is yours again. But instead of punishing everyone, you throw open the taverns, commission plays, and fill your court with laughter, wigs, and thighs. You make sex fashionable again. Here's your historical fact. Charles II reigned from 1660 to 1685, and his court became infamous for its decadence and sexual libertinism. He officially had at least 13 mistresses and fathered over a dozen illegitimate children, none of whom could inherit the throne, but all of whom were showered with titles, lands, and offices. The crown was back, but chastity was out. Among these lovers, one woman shines brighter than the rest, Nell Gwyn. She's your quirky fact for the night, and possibly your favourite bedfellow, because Nell wasn't a duchess or a political pawn. She was an actress, a real one. In fact, she was one of the first women allowed to perform on stage in England after the theatres reopened. Before that, female roles had been played by boys in wigs. You saw Nell on stage at Drury Lane, probably in breeches, cracking jokes and showing just enough leg to start a riot. You were hooked. She grew up dirt poor, sold oranges in the theatre, and climbed her way into your bed using nothing but wit, guts, and timing. No fancy family, no titles, just pure Restoration charisma. She called you her Charles III, because she'd already been with 2 others named Charles. She once told a mob mistaking her for a rival mistress, "Good people, I am the Protestant whore," and the crowd cheered. She wasn't just tolerated, she was loved, and you kept her close for the rest of your life. But the others? Oh, there were others. Barbara Palmer, Countess of Castlemaine, your long-standing mistress, hot-tempered and dangerously Catholic. She had so much political influence that Parliament complained. Louise de Querouaille, a French noblewoman with diplomatic ties and a sense of elegance you appreciated as you aged. Hortense Mancini, an Italian adventurer who duelled her lovers and drank like a soldier. Each woman brought something: alliances, money, drama, intelligence. And you rewarded them all. Titles, dukedoms for their sons, positions for their husbands. Your mistresses weren't just decorations, they were courtiers with teeth. Here's the scholarly debate. Did Charles's sexual politics undermine the monarchy, or preserve it? Some historians argue that his court's excess damaged royal authority, setting the stage for the Glorious Revolution and the eventual decline of absolute monarchy in England. Others claim the opposite, that his openness about his relationships combined with his refusal to pursue religious persecution or vengeance helped stabilise a fractured kingdom. He gave the people bread and circuses, and sometimes scandal is a better sedative than law. But let's not pretend your mistresses were passive. They manoeuvred with the best of them. Barbara Palmer was so powerful that she got her children titles while being despised by your wife, Queen Catherine of Braganza. She'd barge into court meetings in full tantrum. You tolerated it. Why? Because you needed her family's support. Because she had leverage. Because the bed was a cabinet meeting, and she knew how to negotiate in silk and eyeliner. Even Nell, bless her bawdy soul, used her influence to help her family. She pleaded with you to make her son a duke. You hesitated. She threatened to blackmail you with the truth. You caved. Tonight, you recline on a velvet couch in Whitehall Palace, a wine glass dangling from your fingers as music drifts in from the ballroom. One mistress is laughing beside you, another sulking across the room. You keep the balance like a juggler with grenades. You know they all talk, plot, try to outshine one another, and you encourage it. Let them fight, let them sparkle, as long as they stay loyal, as long as the public stays entertained. Because the truth is, your real genius isn't in military conquest or religious policy, it's in knowing how to keep a nation amused. Your court is a stage, you're the director, and your actresses, they're all playing for power. You once said, "I am the king and I do as I please." But what you didn't say out loud, what you maybe never admitted even to yourself, is that your mistresses often did as they pleased too, and you let them. Because the illusion of control is often better than the real thing. So tonight, As the candlelight flickers off your silver cuffs, and the scent of powder and perfume thickens the air, you raise your glass to your chorus of lovers. England may never love the monarchy again the way they loved you, because you made scandal feel like theatre, and made the bed feel like a throne. Tonight, the crowd is restless outside Versailles, but you're not listening. You're lounging on a chaise trimmed in gold, a white lapdog curled near your bare feet, and a crystal dish of candied violets within reach. You're Jeanne Bécu, though no one calls you that anymore. You're Madame du Barry, royal mistress to Louis XV, and the most envied, resented, and gossiped about woman in France. You weren't born into silks and titles. You were born into the gutter, a child of poverty and scandal who clawed her way up, not with armies or birthright, but with beauty, laughter, and an uncanny ability to make kings forget the world is collapsing around them. You came from nothing, illegitimate, poor, a hairdresser's assistant, a woman who, in any other century, would have been used and discarded by the age of 20. But in pre-revolutionary France, where the court at Versailles ran on whispers and waistlines, you found the one currency more valuable than blood: charm. Not the hard, calculating kind, the soft, disarming kind. You made powerful men laugh. You knew how to flutter your eyelashes without looking foolish. You wore your past like perfume, thick enough to make people dizzy, but never clear enough for anyone to pin you down. Your historical fact tonight: Madame du Barry became the official maîtresse en titre to Louis XV in 1769, after the death of Madame de Pompadour. Unlike Pompadour, who had been educated and politically savvy, du Barry was widely considered a pretty plaything with no pedigree. She was the last royal mistress of the French monarchy, and she came to court not as a noblewoman, but as a former courtesan. It caused absolute chaos. To install you officially, they had to fabricate a marriage. You were quickly wed to the brother of your patron, who was, let's be honest, pimping you to the king, and now that you were legally titled, the doors of Versailles cracked open. But not everyone welcomed you. Oh no. Marie Antoinette, the teenage Dauphine, loathed you on sight, and not just for the obvious reasons. She came from Habsburg royalty, taught to see women like you as vulgar, dangerous, and disposable. You floated through court in lilac silk and diamonds the size of quail eggs, throwing banter like confetti and refusing to shrink. Marie ignored you at parties, refused to speak to you for months. In the cutthroat ecosystem of Versailles, a snub from the Dauphine wasn't just shade, it was strategy. Your quirky fact. When Marie Antoinette finally did speak to you, it was at a New Year's gathering, after intense pressure from Louis XV. She turned, expression like carved ice, and said, "There are many people at Versailles today." That's it. That was the line. But for a court that measured status in syllables, it was a seismic event. Still, you had the king. He adored you, called you ma chère, showered you with gifts so absurd they made ministers squirm: chateaux, gowns, jewels, and a monthly allowance so enormous it could have fed half of Paris. You redecorated rooms, flirted with diplomats, and turned your salon into the most talked-about space in Versailles. You weren't discreet. You were dazzling. But you weren't stupid either. You knew Louis was aging, growing sick. Guilt gnawed at him. He'd once been young, adored, the hope of France. Now he was grey, cynical, and surrounded by preachers who warned that you were dragging him toward damnation. The Jesuits whispered. The courtiers plotted. And in the end, religion won. When Louis XV contracted smallpox in 1774, they forced you out of Versailles. Literally. No goodbye, no ceremony, just a carriage and cold stares. The king refused to see you on his deathbed. Pressured by his confessors, he banished you to save his soul. And when he died, the court exhaled like it had been holding its breath for a decade. Your exile began immediately. You were sent to a convent, the royal allowance vanished. And Marie Antoinette, now queen, she made sure you stayed far, far from the palace. But history wasn't done with you yet. Now comes the scholarly debate. Was du Barry a shallow opportunist, a pretty face in the wrong place at the wrong time, or was she the final doomed echo of a dying system? Some argue that you symbolised everything wrong with the monarchy: decadence, waste, moral rot. That you were Versailles in human form, all glitter and emptiness. But others say no, that you were simply visible, that male courtiers were equally corrupt, equally extravagant, but no one wrote libels about them. You were a woman who rose too high, too fast, without the right name or manners, and you paid the price. And oh, did you pay it? When the revolution came, it didn't matter that you'd lived quietly for years. It didn't matter that you'd tried to stay neutral. They dragged you into the streets anyway, charged you with treason, and accused you of sending money to émigrés. Your old jewels, the ones Louis gave you, were enough to condemn you. At your trial you wept, pleaded, promised anything. But they weren't there for justice. They wanted spectacle. You were executed in 1793, screaming. According to witnesses, you begged for your life right up until the end. Not because you lacked dignity, but because you knew better than anyone what this was. Not punishment, performance. You were the curtain call of the royal mistress era, the last woman to wear that title before the monarchy collapsed under its own silk-draped weight. So tonight, as the guillotine blade rises over your powdered wig, and your scream echoes over the crowd, remember this. You didn't start the fire. You just danced beside it, laughed beside it, lived beside it until the music stopped. And then you paid for all of it. You're on an island tonight surrounded by black rock and salt spray, the wind warm and scented with plumeria. The ocean stretches in all directions, soft and endless. But this land is not soft. This is Hawaii before colonization, before sugar barons and missionaries came bearing sermons and silk. And here, sex is not shameful. It's sacred. You're a li'i, Hawaiian royalty, born into a system where intimacy, genealogy and mana, the spiritual force that powers the world, are braided together like lei strands. You're not sneaking around to love. You're honouring your lineage by doing it in the open, under moonlight, with the gods watching. Here, sex isn't a weapon hidden in silk sheets. It's a ritual, a signal of rank, a right protected by law and by myth. And unlike many other royal systems you've explored, the Ali'i don't tighten bloodlines out of fear. They do it out of reverence, because blood is power. And when it comes to ruling these islands, your body isn't just a political pawn. It's a transmitter of divine authority. Your historical fact. In pre-contact Hawaiian society, high-ranking Ali'i often engaged in niaupio relationships, sacred unions between close relatives, such as brother and sister, uncle and niece, or first cousins. These weren't considered taboo, but vital. They were believed to produce offspring with the highest concentration of mana, making them spiritually and politically fit to lead. Kings like Kamehameha I had to navigate these expectations while also managing rival clans and chiefs, whose genealogies were just as tangled and potent. The quirky fact. There were protocols for observing royal sex. That's not a euphemism. If two high-ranking Ali'i were known to be engaging in a niaupio union, select witnesses might be chosen to observe, not out of voyeurism, but reverence. This wasn't about privacy. It was ceremony. The act itself affirmed cosmic balance. It maintained the ancestral line between gods and chiefs. Try explaining that at Thanksgiving. You, as a chief or chiefess, don't have to marry for political alliances. They're already in your blood. You choose partners based on genealogy and spiritual compatibility. And that power isn't gendered. Female Ali'i can rule. They can take lovers. They can command armies and land. Your rank doesn't sit behind a husband's name. It sits in your bones. Take Ka'ahumanu, for instance, one of Hawaii's most famous and influential royal women. She became one of Kamehameha's wives and later his favourite. But she wasn't just a consort. She was strategist, lawmaker, and eventually a co-ruler. After Kamehameha's death, she helped break the ancient kapu system, the sacred law code that governed everything from food to physical contact. She dined with men in public. She reshaped society. She told the old gods to step aside. Now comes the scholarly debate. Were these sexual customs genuinely empowering, or just a different kind of dynastic pressure disguised as spirituality? Some anthropologists argue that niaupio unions and sacred sexual protocols were rigid systems designed to preserve power within elite families, just like any other monarchy. Others point out that the Hawaiian approach acknowledged sex as an open force, a tool for building, not controlling, and gave both men and women substantial autonomy within their roles. Unlike in Europe, where women were often politically neutralized by marriage, high-ranking Hawaiian women could grow more powerful through it. You tonight might be a young Ali'i Wahine chosen to enter a union with your cousin, the son of a rival chief. There's no scandal in it, only significance. Your bloodlines match. Your shared ancestry isn't a threat, it's a confirmation. The kahuna have blessed it. The genealogists have traced it. You're ready. The night of the union, you're adorned in kappa cloth dyed with red uki-uki berries. Your hair is perfumed with sandalwood. Drums beat softly in the distance. Not a demand, but an acknowledgement. You're not being given away. You're stepping into power. Or maybe you're Moe, the ruling chief. You take lovers, both male and female. No one blinks. Love is fluid. Partnerships are political, but also personal. No one confuses sexual autonomy with moral decay. In fact, moral decay would be not honouring your lineage through sacred union. Virginity isn't prized. Fertility is. The land reflects your body. Volcanoes pulse like hearts. Ocean tides roll in rhythms older than time. The people believe the gods walk among them, and sometimes those gods walk in the form of chiefs like you. To touch you is to risk death. To lie with you is to create life imbued with the fire of heaven. But of course, this world won't last forever. The missionaries will come. They'll wear black wool in 90-degree heat and call your sacred practices sin. They'll teach that your gods are false, your relationships impure, your rituals demonic. They'll ban the chants, outlaw the unions, recast your ruling class as fallen. By the late 19th century, Niapio will vanish. The Ali'i will still exist. Many will become Christian, but their power will change. Their bodies will no longer carry divine charge. Their marriages will mirror Europe's, and their love will hide, kneeling behind stained glass and rewritten laws. But tonight that hasn't happened yet. Tonight, you sit by a torchlit shoreline with your chosen lover, your ancestry written across your skin like stars across the sky. The people feast nearby. Someone is chanting your lineage aloud. You listen, and you feel your bones echo with the names of gods and warriors. This union isn't private, it's powerful. You're not marrying to climb the ladder, you are the ladder. And the body beside you doesn't threaten your authority. They complete it. The snow is heavy tonight, muffling the sound of hooves across stone, and the palace glows like a frozen jewel. Layers of candlelight and secrets stacked behind icicle-draped windows. You're in St. Petersburg now, in the glittering, treacherous world of 18th century Imperial Russia. The Tsars are feared. The palace guards are everywhere. And in the Winter Palace, power doesn't change hands with votes or treaties. It moves through the bedroom. And you're Catherine the Great, Empress, autocrat, enlightened despot. And yes, you've heard all the rumours. Tonight we sift through the gossip about the gossip, and the real story of how one woman used sex not to scandalise, but to survive, dominate, and transform an empire. Let's clear one thing up right away. No, you did not die trying to have sex with a horse. It's a story invented decades after your death by people who couldn't stomach the idea of a woman holding absolute power without a husband, or worse, with lovers she didn't apologise for. Your real life? Infinitely more interesting. You were born Sophia of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess with modest prospects. At 14, you were summoned to Russia to marry the heir to the throne, Grand Duke Peter, an awkward, cruel, unstable boy who idolised Frederick the Great and loathed everything Russian, including you. The marriage was a disaster. He openly humiliated you. He played with toy soldiers in bed. He drank too much. He insulted your body. For years you lived in silence, studying Russian, converting to orthodoxy and playing the long game. Here's your historical fact. Catherine staged a coup in 1762 and overthrew her husband just months after he became emperor. She may or may not have ordered his assassination. Sources differ. But what's certain is this. He was out and you were in. You claimed the throne as a woman, without precedent, without apology, and you never gave it back. But you were alone now, a widow, a woman on a throne surrounded by hungry men. The court was full of daggers. You needed allies, and you knew better than to trust words. You needed loyalty that couldn't be bought, bribed, or bullied. You needed intimacy. So you chose your lovers carefully, deliberately, not just for pleasure, but for protection. Take Grigory Orlov. He helped lead the coup that brought you to power. You rewarded him with titles, land, and your bed. He wasn't just a fling, he was security. And when he bored you, when his charm wore off and his ambitions grew louder than his affections, you dismissed him. Kindly, generously, but firmly. Then there was Potemkin. Ah, Potemkin, your match. the man who understood your hunger, for intellect, for empire, for companionship that didn't shrink you. You may have married him in secret. No one knows for sure. What we do know is that you remained close until his death, long after the physical affair faded. He managed your southern campaigns. He helped you annex Crimea. He built cities in your name. His successors, your later lovers, were often chosen by him. It wasn't just romance, it was administration. Here's your quirky fact. Catherine kept a roster of lovers well into her 60s. She built apartments for them near the palace, gifted them vast estates, paid generous pensions when the flame went out. One of them was decades younger, another a Polish prince, another just a dashing cavalry officer who caught her eye during a parade. But it wasn't wanton, it was curated. Catherine didn't fall in love blindly. She managed her relationships like she managed her empire, strategically. Now for the scholarly debate. Was Catherine's sexuality a tool she used to rule, or a narrative later used to undermine her? Feminist historians argue the latter, that her reputation as a nymphomaniac was shaped by the misogyny of male historians, horrified by a woman who dared to wield both political and sexual agency. Her male counterparts, Peter the Great, Louis XV, Henry VIII, had dozens of lovers, mistresses, even illegitimate children. No one reduced them to gossip. But Catherine, they turned her into a cautionary tale. Others suggest Catherine did use sex as part of her diplomacy, that her lovers weren't just distractions, they were satellites, men she could trust, shaped by affection and elevated by loyalty. She didn't just reward them, she used them, installed them in government roles, tested them for usefulness, and discarded them when they failed. And perhaps both are true, because you, Catherine, weren't trying to be loved. You were trying to survive. You reformed the legal code, expanded education, corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot, modernized the economy, opened hospitals, secured the Black Sea, and through it all you kept choosing your lovers, one by one. Men who would serve you, guard you, mirror you, never equal, always useful. And here you are tonight, wrapped in furs, walking through the candlelit corridors of Tsarskoye Selo. The courtiers bow, the guards salute, and you are thinking about your next move, not just on the map, but in your bedchamber, because that bed is not a place of rest. It's a throne of velvet, a war room where trust is built without words. You don't blush when they whisper your name in salons. You don't flinch when they call you excessive. You know the truth. You ruled for over 3 decades, unchallenged, unapologetic, and when men called you dangerous, they weren't wrong. You were. The desert air tonight is cool and dry, stirring the linen curtains of a golden pavilion. You hear the faint clink of bronze anklets, the rustle of silk, and the distant call of musicians playing for someone far more important than you. You're a concubine in the imperial harem of the Abbasid Caliphate. Or maybe you're the caliph himself, lounging on embroidered cushions, swirling wine. Yes, forbidden but flowing nonetheless, while a poet recites verses that turn religion into romance and law into longing. Either way, you're about to learn that in the golden age of Islam, sex and power were not opposites. They were entangled, carefully, legally, and very, very beautifully. You're in Baghdad, 9th century. Not the city of war-torn headlines, but the shining capital of the known world, the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, a city of libraries, gardens, perfumes, and palaces. And at the centre of this empire, hidden behind carved doors and eunuch guards, is the harem. Not just a den of pleasure, it's a political institution, one with its own hierarchy, ambitions, and quiet wars. The caliph's wives and concubines, his daughters, his mother, they all live here, and they all want the same thing, influence. And for most of them, that means bearing a son. Here's your historical fact. In the Abbasid Caliphate, concubines, often enslaved women from across the empire, could rise to extraordinary power if they bore the caliph a child. That child, even if born to a concubine, could become the next caliph. And the mother? She would be elevated to Walad, a legal status that freed her upon the death of the father. Some of these women, especially those who gave birth to sons who became heirs, shaped policy, palace appointments, and even succession. You might be thinking this was all submission. But here's the twist. Some of these women were polymaths, educated, trained in poetry, music, astronomy, and law. A particularly prized concubine could quote Quranic verses by memory and debate them, compose flawless ghazals and sing them with perfect pitch. Charm wasn't just physical, it was intellectual. Seduction was measured in syllables, not skin. Enter one of the most iconic figures of this world, Zubaydah bint Jafar. She wasn't a concubine, but the wife of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, and she redefined what it meant to be a royal woman. Known for her intelligence, extravagance, and public works, she ordered the construction of wells and resting stations for pilgrims on the route to Mecca. Her name became synonymous with grandeur, but behind the glitter was calculation. She knew how to wield her position, how to surround herself with loyal scholars, and how to turn her role as wife into a kind of ministerial authority. Now for your quirky fact, some concubines and courtesans in the Abbasid court became so famous for their poetry that their verses were recorded in anthologies centuries later. One such woman, Inan, was a celebrated poet and concubine of Caliph al-Ma'mun. She debated philosophers, recited original poetry in public salons, and is rumoured to have bested multiple male scholars in poetic duels. Imagine being so good at flirting in verse that the caliph cancels his meetings just to hear your next couplet. But power wasn't limited to the bedroom, or to the birth canal. The harem was a shadow court. Women spied, schemed, aligned themselves with viziers, bribed eunuchs for information, and orchestrated the rise and fall of rivals, all of it without ever appearing in public. Modesty wasn't absence, it was armour, and within it, women built entire empires of influence. Here's the scholarly debate. Were these women powerful because of their relationships with men, or in spite of them? Some argue that their influence was entirely derivative, that no matter how educated or clever, their agency was always contingent on male approval. Others push back, saying these women weaponized the system itself, using the very constraints meant to limit them as tools of power. They mastered the rules of the game and then wrote new ones from behind the curtain. You, tonight, may be reclining beside the caliph, your voice low and musical, reciting lines from Abu Nuwas, the court poet known for his wildly explicit verses and irreverent theology. You joke about fate, sip from a glass of something definitely not water, and smile when the caliph laughs. You've been here long enough to know when laughter means victory. Or maybe you're the caliph, and you're not just entranced by beauty, you're calculating lineage. Your empire is vast, your enemies are many. A son born from the wrong woman could mean civil war. But the right woman? She could bring you peace, consolidate your power, outwit your vizier, and ensure your name is written in the histories as more than just another man with 1,000 silks. And maybe that woman is already pregnant. She knows it. You don't. Not yet. But she's already begun laying her plans, visiting the astrologers, forging quiet alliances with her chamber guards, requesting a tutor for herself under the pretense of boredom. When the child is born, she'll name him strategically. She'll commission lullabies that praise your ancestors. She'll write verses for him. She'll raise him to be the man who rules after you. And in that moment, she will become something more than beautiful. She will become untouchable. Because in this palace, sex isn't dirty or divine. It's a thread in a much larger tapestry of power, language, and survival. And if you think the guards outside that harem door are there to protect the caliph from the women inside, you haven't been paying attention. The palace tonight is made of sandstone, shadow, and secrets. You're in India now, deep inside the Mughal Empire at its most decadent, where poetry drips from tongues like honey, where entire gardens are built to imitate paradise, and where the women behind the Zanana walls hold more power than anyone on the battlefield. You're not a sultan, you're not a soldier, you're something more subtle, more dangerous. Maybe you're a royal consort, maybe you're a Mughal empress, or maybe you're one of the Tawaifs, the legendary courtesans who could undo a man with a dance and outwit a minister with a couplet. Either way, you're not just part of the story. You are its engine. This isn't Europe. There are no fragile queens here waiting to be rescued or silenced. In the Mughal world, royal women, especially in the inner court, were often intensely educated, politically strategic, and yes, sexually empowered. They didn't just decorate the emperor's life. They shaped it. They selected his alliances. They built his tomb. They arranged his successors. And sometimes they erased his enemies with a single whispered word. Your historical fact. The Mughal Zenana, the women's quarters of the royal palace, was not just a place of confinement. It was a political institution filled with mothers, wives, concubines, sisters and servants, all part of a complex hierarchy that governed both domestic life and dynastic succession. The emperor's mother, or Padshah Begum, often wielded immense influence over court decisions, far beyond what any official minister might claim. Think of it as a shadow cabinet, wrapped in gold-embroidered veils. Take Nur Jahan, one of the most powerful women in Mughal history. She began her life as a widow, remarried to Emperor Jahangir, and became not just his favourite wife, but his de facto co-ruler. She issued imperial orders, farmans, in her own name. She minted coins bearing her image. She sat behind the jaraka, yes, a screen, but with full view of the court, and directed foreign and domestic policy with a flick of her jewelled hand. If you think mistresses were just ornaments, Nur Jahan would like a word, or a war. Now your quirky fact: the Tawifs, elite courtesans trained in music, poetry, dance and etiquette, were not the same as prostitutes. They were cultural elites. Often more educated than most noblemen, they entertained not just with their bodies, but with their minds. Mughal princes, scholars and artists visited their salons for conversation, art, and sometimes advice. Some even became patrons of literature and architecture. One Tawaif in Lucknow famously refused a marriage proposal from a nobleman, saying, "I am not for sale, but you are welcome to learn." So tonight, maybe you are a Tawaif yourself preparing for the evening's mehfil. You sit before a polished mirror, painting kohl around your eyes, fixing your veil just so. Your audience is small, a prince, a poet, a retired general. You will sing, yes, but you'll also provoke. Your verses contain satire cloaked in romance, rebellion hidden inside metaphor. You dance, but your movement mocks their policies, and by the time they realise they've been outwitted, they've already clapped. Or maybe you're Mumtaz Mahal, beloved consort of Shah Jahan, mother of 14 children, and the inspiration behind the most famous tomb in the world, the Taj Mahal. But your power didn't come from death. In life, you held real sway in court matters. Shah Jahan trusted you with his seal, consulted you on state affairs, and built palaces with your input. It was love, yes, but it was also respect. That rare combination. The scholarly debate, whether women like Nur Jahan or Mumtaz wielded actual political power, or were simply figureheads elevated by romantic narrative. Some historians argue that their influence was exaggerated later to paint a more poetic image of the Mughal court. Others, especially modern scholars re-evaluating the Persian and Urdu sources, assert that these women were active participants in governance, cultural development, and imperial vision. When the emperor was weak, the Zenana rose, and when the emperor was strong, the Zenana often directed his strength, and of course the court didn't always approve. When Nur Jahan's power grew too visible, male nobles rebelled. Conspiracies mounted. Her stepson Shah Jahan, yes, the one who built the Taj Mahal, eventually sidelined her after his father's death. But by then, she had already governed an empire from behind a screen, buried her enemies in gardens, and shaped the course of Mughal history like a hand-moving sand. So tonight, you're walking through a moonlit courtyard in Agra. Your footsteps are silent on cool marble. A servant brings word that the emperor requests your presence. You take your time. Your silk train trails behind you like a comet. The stars are out, the jasmine is in bloom, and you smile, not because you're flattered, but because you already know what he's going to ask. You already know what answer you'll give, and you know that in this palace, beneath these domes carved with prayers, sex isn't shameful, scandalous, or secret. It is part of the machinery, the perfume in the ink, the rhythm under the empire's pulse. Here, your body isn't the battleground, it's the battlefield map, and tonight, you're about to redraw it. The candles flicker against high ceilings, caught in massive crystal chandeliers, and you stand at the edge of yet another ballroom, yet another empire. This time, you're in Vienna, or maybe Paris, Berlin, or even St. Petersburg again. It's the 19th century now, and the age of formal royal mistresses is technically ended. No more titles for favourites, no more official apartments just off the king's chamber. The age of enlightenment has rolled through, and with it came revolution, reform, and a deepening obsession with virtue. But make no mistake, sex hasn't left the throne room. It's simply changed clothes. Tonight it wears pearls and restraint. It walks softly. It hides behind piano music and polite conversation. But it is still very much in control. You are now a duchess with a scandalous past, or a married countess with a private invitation to the emperor's hunting lodge. Or maybe you're the emperor himself, bored to death by ceremonial duties and craving the thrill of a lover whose glances say everything her lips never do. This is the twilight of the great European empires, and you can feel the decay beneath the polish. Everything is still gilded, but the gold is flaking, and behind every formal dance and family portrait there are letters, affairs, dalliances, carefully arranged marriages with carefully arranged escapes. Your historical fact. In the 19th century, while monarchy tried to clean up its image, especially after the French Revolution shattered the illusion of divine right, sexual politics didn't disappear. They just went underground. In Austria-Hungary, for instance, Emperor Franz Joseph maintained a lifelong affair with actress Katharina Schratt. Though not officially his mistress, she was his companion for over 30 years, reportedly chosen by his wife, Empress Elizabeth, who preferred to ride horses across the Alps than share a bed with a stiff-lipped monarch. It was an open secret. Polite society simply looked away. But your quirky fact tonight. Let's talk about Empress Elizabeth herself, Sisi, as the world came to know her. She was a ghost in the palace, a woman of stunning beauty, notorious dieting, and deep melancholy. Sisi hated court life, hated being touched, hated aging. She exercised obsessively, maintained a 19-inch waist into her 50s, and slept upright to protect her figure. She wrote mournful poetry, travelled constantly, and was once described as a shadow who could not be caught. Yet it's said she had several close male friendships that may have crossed into intimacy, none officially confirmed, all heavily rumoured. And while Franz Joseph slept with his not-quite-mistress, Sisi became a myth in her own right, a woman too modern for her role, too wild for her crown. This era is filled with contradictions. Sex is no longer openly part of court structure, but it is quietly everywhere. Queens smile through loveless marriages. Kings attend the opera with their wives and leave with actresses. Everyone pretends, but everyone knows. The courtesan has been replaced by the salon hostess. The favourite has become the confidant. And sometimes, the sex isn't even physical. It's letters exchanged, hands brushed in passing, thoughts flirted across ballroom floors. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the 19th century represent progress for royal women, an escape from being defined by their sexuality? Or did it simply repurpose the same old trap in new velvet drapes? Some historians argue that with the decline of the official mistress system, women were finally allowed to exist at court without being valued solely for their bodies or their wombs. Others say the shift only made the sexual politics more insidious. Women were still bartered in marriage, still blamed for childless unions, still whispered about when they were too close to a man, or not close enough. They just had to be quieter about it now. You tonight might be in Prussia, seated beside Crown Prince Wilhelm at a formal dinner. His wife watches from across the table. She says nothing as your gloved hand rests a second too long against his. Nothing is said. Everything is implied. Later he'll send you a note, his handwriting crisp and military, a compliment, a meeting suggestion. You'll burn it after reading. Or maybe you're in Paris, where the salons of clever women like Juliette Recamier, George Sand and others become the new battlefield. Here, words are weapons. Charm is currency. Lovers are not claimed, they are hinted at. And the men come running, politicians, princes, poets. Your body isn't offered, it's suggested. And somehow, that makes it even more powerful. And still, behind all of this, is empire. This is the last era of true monarchies in Europe. Soon, World War I will reduce entire dynasties to rubble. Thrones will fall, aristocrats will flee. Revolution will knock on doors lined with brocade, and when it does, it will use sex as one of its loudest weapons. Degenerate aristocrats, they'll say. Immoral queens. Licentious courts. The same bodies that once seduced power will now be used to justify its downfall. But tonight that hasn't happened yet. You're still here, standing at the edge of the waltz, listening to Strauss echo through marbled halls. You lift your chin, you smile just enough, and you let him take your hand. The dance begins, and no one watching would guess that this polite touch might shift a border, secure a treaty, or end a marriage. But you know. Because by now you've learned the final truth of this long, tangled story. Royal sex was never just about pleasure. It was always about power. And power, in the end, always finds a way to slip into bed with someone. So here we are, 30 centuries, 25 palaces, and more silk sheets than we'll ever admit. You've tiptoed through candlelit corridors in Versailles, snuck behind the harem screens in Baghdad, endured cousin marriage ceremonies under Habsburg chandeliers, and stood barefoot under starlight on the shores of ancient Hawaii, where royal bodies pulsed with myth and mana. And through it all, one thing has remained true. Sex was never separate from power. It was power, a mechanism, a message, a method for survival, domination, diplomacy, and sometimes, only sometimes, love. The monarchs and mistresses of history didn't always get to choose who they were, but they learned quickly how to use what they had. A glance, a body, a child, a poem tucked into a sleeve, a calculated night visit. Whether you were Catherine the Great conducting affairs of state from her bed, or Lucretia Borgia forced to marry for someone else's ambitions, or a Mughal empress issuing orders from behind a veil, you were never just a body. You were a battleground. We've seen women rise by seduction, only to be erased by myth. Men who ruled through charisma, undone by a scandal. Societies that condemned the very tactics they depended on. And yet, we still study them, still obsess, still whisper their names like secrets. Why? Because they remind us that history wasn't written only in battles and borders. It was written in bedrooms, in bruised egos, in lust that toppled dynasties, in alliances that began with an exchanged glance over a goblet of wine. Sex wasn't just part of royal life, it was royal life, its backbone, its loophole, its softest and sharpest weapon. So if you've made it this far, still awake maybe, or maybe drifting, thank you for coming with me, for dimming the lights and settling in and letting the shadows of the past press up close for a while. Sleep now if you like. Dream of courtiers and queens, kings with secrets, poets with agendas, and remember, no matter how much lace and law a world wraps itself in, it's always the quietest touch, the softest whisper that decides who rules next.